Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and under new ownership since 2020, Moose sells a wide selection of comics from every publisher and time period, along with action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations: Harrison, New York, aka my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have kids and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow Aw Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah. Filmmakers and movie fans alike should be sure to attend these film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and Round Reel in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Take it from an alum of 2 of them. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. His abilities may be of Jor-El's blood, but it was his time in Smallville with Jonathan and Martha Kent and all the people there that made Clark Kent a hero. Now, in a Digging for Kryptonite event years in the making, we revisit the seminal, decade-long television series Smallville, starring Tom Welling, and how its reinterpretation of a legend cemented my fandom and brought the Man of Steel into a new era. The final act of a Superboy fan journey is at hand. These are the Trials of Smallville. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superboy fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. These are the Trials of Smallville, and joining me to count down the top 10 episodes of the entire series is the host of Always Hold On to Smallville, returning guest, Zach Moore. Welcome back.
Hey, Anthony, very excited to talk the top 10 episodes of Smallville with you.
Yeah, this fool's errand of an episode that I came up with. What an impossible task. We talk about Clark's journey being an impossible odyssey. This is the real impossible odyssey, trying to pick the top 10, let alone rank them. Nonsense.
Oof. I mean, 217, 218 episodes. To pick 10 of them? I mean, that's what's percent? That's like less than 20%, right?
For sure. And look, I don't say this to knock Superboy, the TV show. We spent numerous episodes on it. I have a newfound appreciation for it. And I've heard from a number of audience members who have checked out the show because of our discussions about it, which is lovely. All I'll say was a lot easier picking my top 10 Superboy episodes than it was picking my top 10 Smallville episodes. But hey, since the last time you were here, because you were here for the 2-part kickoff to the Trials of Smallville, now we're here at the finale. So you're bookending this event, and I appreciate having you back here. But since you were here, you and I met in person.
We did. It's exciting.
It was
transcended the internet here, Anthony.
Yeah, it was a ton of fun, and it was so funny. We did a double date with our wives. We met for brunch, and you and I were like, we got to take a picture. Like, the audience they'll love it. And our wives were like, okay. But people did love it. They loved it.
Yeah, yeah. And it was, obviously, we didn't plan it out this far in advance, but we happened to meet on the day one of our episodes dropped. So it's like you and I are listening to our episode. How conceited. But I'm glad we have that photo and that memory. And no, it was great. And I mean, you and your wife was great. And I look forward to doing it again sometime in the not too distant future. But it's funny how that works. Because again, there was no plan here. There's no synchronization and coordination. It was just we just happened to be in the area at the time. We gave you a little heads up, worked out, and it happened to be in the middle of this Superboy fan journey, and especially in the middle of your Smallville coverage. So funny how life works out, right?
Yeah, it worked out great. It was a ton of fun. And rather than save this for the end, let me do this now. By the time this episode drops towards the end of October, your season 10 coverage will be underway. What do you want to share with folks?
Oh, man. So we are going into season 10. It's the final season of Smallville, as I'm sure most people know. And it has been a journey. So it's funny, I had been not putting it off or anything, right? But there is something about like, man, like this is it. Like there's no like because for so long now, I've been like, oh well, yeah. I mean, we got seasons left, hundreds of episodes, dozens of episodes left. This is it, y'all. I'm never gonna start a season of Smallville, like a televised season of Smallville, I should say. start a coverage of that on my podcast again, and I'm also releasing it, and this will be before this episode comes out, but releasing it in conjunction with a salute to Smallville, the Creation Entertainment Convention, which I will be going to. So I figured once I knew I was going to that, it's the first ever Smallville convention. I will be there, and I hope if you're listening out, I hope you went, and I hope it met you there. So, but I decided to kind of coordinate watching season 10 with that. It felt appropriate, which means I am going to spill over into 2025, which I had initially said at the beginning of 2024. This is it, y'all. At the end of this calendar year, I'm done with episode by episode coverage. And it's funny how life works. Of course, I thought this podcast would take me 3, maybe 4 years if I got busy. And here we are, 8 years later. And I'm like, here, we're going to launch the last season, y'all. So that's what's coming up. Got some exciting guests, a lot of familiar voices, a lot of returning voices, maybe people I hadn't heard in a while. A lot of the same regulars. I'm just really looking forward to, much like Smallville season 10 was like a celebration of all 10 years. Like that's what I'm trying to go for with season 10. And yeah, man, it is surreal to be in the final season of Smallville and the Smallville podcast coverage. Because again, 217, 218 episodes. It feels like this always distant end game, but it's quick approaching.
No, I can only imagine. I mean, I don't plan to wind down this podcast anytime soon, but at the same time, eventually this fan journey, I think, will conclude. And when we eventually get there, it's a long Excel list, but it's not infinite. And when we get there, it will feel surreal, to your point. And then similarly, I do have my George Reeves rewatch podcast. And just like you were saying, that's just over 100 episodes, and those are only a half hour. I figured, all right, it'll be a couple of years, but I think by the time we're done with that, it'll have been a few years as well. But I'm excited to hear your season 10 coverage. I'm sure the audience is as well. I'm looking forward to joining you for the Scion episode. And I know we really haven't talked about Connor Kent in that Scion episode as part of this event. Part of it is because I'm going to be talking about it with you on your show, but also next year on Digging for Kryptonite, we got some big plans for Connor Kent. I have not forgotten Connor. We're going to give him his due. And that's where his appearance on Smallville will sort of work in. And then not only do you have that coming out, but the 4th and final season of Superman and Lois will be underway by the time people hear this episode. And so you and your wife will be resuming your Always Hold On to Superman and Lois coverage as well.
Yes. Very exciting. 10 more episodes for us to cover together. And, I had a good feeling about, I have a good feeling about it. I've had a good feeling about it. And as things start to come out, I'm having even better feelings about it. I think they're going to satisfy us, Anthony. You and I were talking, off microphone, as we often do, as I'm happy to say. Sometimes the show takes a while to give us what we're looking for, but it always gives us what we're looking for, it seems. So I have faith that even though they got only 10 episodes and all the characters are now guest stars and they've had to radically rethink things, I'm very excited, and I'm sure you're very excited about the direction because they're kind of doing the Death and Return of Superman. It looks like your favorite thing, your gateway to this whole deal, huh?
Yeah, man. When they released that extended trailer with that ongoing battle with Doomsday, which I didn't think we would see, I just assumed we would start in the aftermath. And so the fact that we're still in the thick of that battle, amazing. And I'm looking forward to that final season. I'm looking forward to your episode by episode coverage. Here on Digging for Kryptonite, we'll do a big Mondo episode at the end of the season where we kind of go through everything. And then you and our mutual friend Matt Truex, who's been on the show, you guys also do Always Hold On to the Flash, the 90s John Wesley Shipp series, which very recently got a beautiful Warner Archive Blu-ray release, which is still sitting on my shelf. And so once I finally crack that open, I'm going to dive into your episodes. But that's great. Coming out, and I hope people will tune into that as well.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, The Flash is a show that I watched when I was a very small child. And I was fortunate that my parents were a VCR, VHS family. And so they recorded some episodes and I was able to relive those. And I've always been a big fan of that show. And it's this perfect like middle ground between like, what we got in like Lois and Clark and then what we got in the Batman movies in the 80s and 90s. And it's if that's your speed for superhero content, like that's a gem, man. It's a diamond. And like, I just feel like people know about it, but I don't feel like enough people like yourself have dived into it. And I do. And yes, they're not all bangers, but there was some excellent stuff in there. And it is a true 1 season wonder. And it's a shame it only lasted a year. And if people are wondering why it only lasted a year, budget, schedule. It was up against The Simpsons and The Cosby Show, so it was always like fighting the ratings. It got moved around a lot, and then again, it was the most expensive show on TV at the time for all the special effects. And John Wesley Shipp, of course, you might know him as Henry Allen or Jay Garrick or Earth 90 Flash from the Arrowverse, because he came back and played all those characters. So the legacy of that show lives on. And as you said, it recently came out on high definition Blu-ray, and it looks great. And that's been a passion show of mine for a long time. And so yes, I had to take that opportunity to do that podcast with our mutual friend Matt Schrick. So and so hey, thanks for all the promotion off the top here, man.
You got it. I figured we'll take care of this and we'll dive in. Neither of us has a podcast about this, but while we're talking Blu-ray releases, I just picked up
holding it up, folks.
Yeah, I just picked up the Super Friends complete collection on Blu-ray, which I'm excited to crack open, and maybe I can get my son to watch some of them. I feel like at 5 years old, these would be kind of perfect for him. He's been really into Teen Titans Go recently, which I had never really watched because I'm a kid show. It's really fun and funny, but maybe we'll get him to watch some of these as well. And we've covered Super Friends on the show before. We looked at a selection of Superman-centric episodes. Now that this is out on Blu-ray, maybe we'll do some more Super Friends coverage down the line. If anyone's interested, please let me know. It's funny. It seems like there's been a lot of interest in these Smallville episodes that we've been doing, which is awesome. And I appreciate it. And it's awesome to hear from fellow Smallville fans. And one of our audience members in particular was like, hey, you should do 10 episodes instead of 7. And then he was like, or you could just do a whole other podcast series. He's like, I know you want people to listen to Always Hold On to Smallville. He's like, but there's enough interest. And I was like, well, I think I'm good on podcast series at the moment, but it's awesome that there's been this interest. It's been a ton of fun. I mean, I really can't put into words how satisfying it has been to rewatch and talk about these episodes. And hopefully that's come across in all of these episodes that we've done. So actually, I have one last big picture question that kind of ties into your experience covering Smallville episode by episode as you have. I'm sure it depends on the episode, but just kind of generally speaking, what has the experience been? Because we talked about how we had the same experience of watching it as high schoolers and college students, being the same age as Clark, how formative it was for us. As you've been revisiting it and like picking apart these episodes, generally speaking, like more often than not, do you feel as if, man, this is better than I remembered it? It's as good as I remembered it. Oh, it's not as good as I remembered it. Overall, what has the feeling been?
There has been, I wouldn't say there's been like macro reassessment of anything, but there's been micro reassessment of things. Like I know when I first started, I was like, season 4 is the worst. Am I right, everybody? Right. And then I can't tell you how many people, yes, emailers, listeners, but I love season 4. It was the first season I watched, and it was my favorite one. I'm like, wow, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend anybody, but as a side point to that, that's what's fun about talking about the things we do, Anthony. It's all fun. The sandbox of entertainment. It's escape. Like we can think differently about this stuff, and it's okay, right? It's just like we're all just having a good time. I find it very interesting when people come in here and they say, "I actually love this one," and let me tell you why. I'm like, "Oh, wow, I would never thought of that, had that point of view before." So I actually find that I encourage that. I find that very interesting. But like, for example, like season 4 is one that like it's not my favorite or anything now, but it's certainly raised in my opinion of certain things. There's maybe one or two things in this top 10 list we'll talk about that there's been a reassessment for me, which I've like, maybe I wasn't too hot on something before, and then reassessing, I'm like, you know what? Yeah, this belongs on this list, for example. The relationships of the show, I've had my ebbs and flows about certain things and certain characters that might have changed. But yeah, sometimes I have a lot of fun on Always on the Small. We have our objective is to have a good time, right? And so, sometimes as there's a bad episode, we enjoy just laughing about it, ripping it apart, right? And I am present-minded. I'm like, man, do I nitpick this show too much? It's like, do I just rip these things apart? But I think as long as it's coming from a place of love, and I think as long as it's coming from a place of love and that translates through the microphone, I think that's okay. Because obviously I love this show, or I wouldn't pour the hours upon hours of time into it, just watching, recording, editing, all the other things that go along with it, social media, as a podcaster. So I think that gives me a certain okay, y'all, give me some space to just express my thoughts are good and bad. So that's kind of where it is. But at the same time, I do try to really celebrate the stuff I do love too, because I do want to balance that out, because it's much fun as it is to sit around and laugh about something that wasn't quite so good. I think it's equally rewarding to sit around and just bask in the greatness of some of this stuff, which is kind of what we're doing today.
Absolutely. And to your point, I know you and I have talked about this, but on and off mic, but whether it's an episode by episode podcast like yours or like my George Reeves show or just what we do on this podcast on a week to week basis, if all we ever did was just gush about everything, I don't want to speak for you. I know for myself, I would be bored. I probably wouldn't do this. And I genuinely don't think the episodes would be as interesting, right? We share our opinions, but positive and negative, but there's always that truthfulness. And like you said, that love. And maybe sometimes people can't fully appreciate this if you're not kind of in this process where, yes, we would not invest the time and energy and money to do this if we didn't care about it, right? And so, we have our feelings just as everyone does listening to it. But like you said, we all kind of come together. And I think by and large, for the most part, at least in my experience, like people are on board with that and it's fun. It's a fun ride and people have come along and it's a wonderful thing. Okay. Our top 10 episodes now. You and I have been exchanging messages. I think it's probably fair to say we've struggled a bit in terms of narrowing these down. Let me just ask, what was your methodology in trying to zero in? And while that marinates, I'll just kind of share kind of what my perspective was on these. So at the outset, I was like, I'm going to pick the best from each season. We're doing 10 episodes. I want all 10 seasons represented. That quickly went out the window. I did say to myself, I want to kind of tread lightly on the premieres and the finales. Like we've talked about, those were the big, heavy episodes. They moved the story forward or they wrapped up storylines. And typically we had budget reserved for those episodes. They were big spectacles, but I wanted to kind of tread lightly and focus more on the week-to-week episodes for the most part, generally speaking. The biggest guiding principle that I had, that I kept reminding myself of, and at least this helped somewhat, was it had to be a banger episode from start to finish. It couldn't just be on the list because there's a great moment or scene or just because it's pivotal to the mythology. Season 10, Isis, where Lois finds out the secret. Most of that episode, I would argue, highly skippable. But you get to that final scene, it's me, Lois. I'm the Blur. And she tackles him. What took you so long? You knew? Great. Wonderful moment. Would never be on my top 10. So that was kind of the guiding principle. It really had to be a strong, tight episode from start to finish, not just scenes or moments. And that was really, like I said, my guiding principle. What about you?
Well, the thought did cross my mind to say, well, there's 10 seasons, there's top 10, but to me, that's kind of like, for baseball fans out there, the Major League Baseball All-Star game, there's a rule where you got to pick at least one player from every team, right? And when you do that, that kind of makes other people who are more worthy to be on the All-Star team not get a slot. It's like, well, you're great, but we got to have a guy for the Pittsburgh Pirates or something, for example. So I didn't want to do that. And then I took kind of what I would maybe call the Tom Welling rule, where it's like, if someone had never seen Smallville, would I show them this episode to show them like what the show's all about, quality, right? Another thing I wanted to kind of zero in on is like, are these things that like we're never going to see somewhere else? Like, are these special events? And some of these episodes like have, if you watch some, and obviously we're going to break all this down, we'll talk about it, but like there's a little bit of everything in some of these, right? You get a little bit of this, a little bit of that, right? And also like it can't just be, there's some A+ moments and scenes in some of these episodes that are some of my favorite episodes of the whole show, favorite scenes of the whole show, I should say, but they're not a top 10 episode, right? And you can't have something lift up to this level in the top 20% of the series just because it had a couple great scenes. Because I would argue every Smallville episode has at least one good to great scene. That's why we keep coming back, right? Character moments, whatever. So this was so hard, man. Like this is more difficult than you guys might think. You might think it's easy for us because we know this show. That actually makes it much harder, in my opinion.
Yeah. So when Lance was here and we talked about Lex, and you haven't heard this based on when we're recording this, but I talked briefly about that episode Subterranean in season 6. Not one of my top episodes, spoiler alert, but it ends with this amazing 30-second sequence of Lex walking through 33.1 with all the hands reaching out and Prelude
AFI
12.
song.
Yeah, it's like, oh my God, like what a badass Lex moment in an otherwise, I think, probably forgettable episode. But yes, to that last point, for anybody listening to this, A, thank you. We appreciate it. But B, if you're like, what about this episode? How is this not on your list? You try making a list of the top 10 and you see how difficult it is. It was very challenging. I'm very curious to see how our lists compare when you and I ranked the DCEU movies. With a couple of exceptions, we were really close. I think when we looked kind of at the tiers, there was some variation within,
almost the same, but
the tiers were basically the same. So I'm curious where we land here, and I'm sure there will be differences, and maybe between our two lists. And yes, we will offer some honorable mentions at the end. Hopefully, everyone's favorite episode is accounted for. I mean, we didn't talk a ton about our methodology before tonight. I will say. Not to speak for you, but I certainly didn't approach this in terms of like, oh, these are my guilty pleasure episodes or anything like that. Like these really are what I consider the top episodes of the show.
Yeah, because there's favorites and there's bests, right? And look, it's all subjective, right? But yeah, there are some that are probably personal favorites to me that I'm like, well, that's not a top 10 episode, but it's still a favorite to me. Now, again, talk about the DCU. There's only 16 movies, right? So of course we're gonna have some variation, but ultimately, like our tastes are gonna line up a certain way, whatever. 218 episodes. It's like, who knows what's gonna happen here? So I'm very excited to compare these lists just between us here.
All right,
and hopefully everybody has a good time hearing us do it.
Yeah, this should be a ton of fun. I've got my clipboard. I've got my list.
That's
I've got my
right
pen.
there.
Well, I want to keep track of what you have and all of that.
Okay,
so.
good.
As guest, I would like to afford you the opportunity to go first. So, Zach, what is number 10 on your list?
Number 10, season 4, episode 17, Onyx. Right
on.
All right. So let me give you my pitch for why this is my number 10 episode. I think it's a pretty genius way to give us a glimpse of future Lex Luthor who we'll never get to see on the show. I think it's a very nuanced performance by Rosenbaum. Like the good Lex is just a couple of clicks off. Like he's a couple of clicks too nice. And the bad Lex still knows how to play good, but he's still fake enough, but people can see through it if they're smart. And then also what I noticed on this rewatch is both versions seem a little incomplete. And I think that's kind of the point. I think some people might say, Rosenbaum, he didn't really crack this. I'm like, well, actually, I don't know. You can interpret it either way because like what those performances showed me was like how complete his everyday Lex is with all the nuance, all that stuff. They needs each other. Otherwise, it's like, well, he's kind of like one dimensionally, but that's kind of the point, right? When he's over the top and all that. I'm a big Star Trek fan, so it's very inspired by the episode "The Enemy Within" from Star Trek, where Captain Kirk gets split in the transporter to good and bad. Very much like this. Even I'm sure they were watching that Star Trek episode when they made this. Like there are even some shots that are very similar. And I love a good Lex finds out Clark's secret moment, right? And we got some fantastic stuff in here. And then what he does with that knowledge, right? And then of course we have the iconic line, "I am the villain of the story," which I believe in both of our preferred versions of Lex Luthor, they would never say that. Right? You know what I'm saying? Because he's the hero of his own story. But it plays into this. The Man in the Iron Mask stuff is perfect, especially for this Lex who's always talking about history and all that. It plays so well. There's some Lionel stuff in here. I want to talk about some of that with you if you like. And then it's season 4, but there's like no season 4 nonsense in here, right? There's no maps and crystals and witches. I mean, there might be a couple references to Jason or something here and there, but that's it. So it's and then to see the Clark Lex confrontations like this is the future that we're seeing now. He's quoting Dark Knight Returns. He's got a kryptonite ring, like fantastic stuff. And this and Rosenbaum finds this, and he does a lot as Lex, but especially here like this, he's weaving in between comedy and villainy so well. And I found that I really like that, like speed of Lex Luthor. So there you go. My number 10 episode is Onyx.
All right. So already we differ. That is one of my honorable mentions, but it did not make the top 10.
Okay, fair. I'm glad it's at least an honorable mention for you.
Yes, it is an honorable mention. And
let me say this, Anthony. It's number 10 for me. It was on the bubble. Like I was these 8, 9, and 10. I was like churning through, putting stuff, copy and pasting, putting it back. So I feel you there. I feel that.
And at the outset of this, I would have assumed this would be on the top 10 for all of the reasons that you cited. And Lance and I did talk about that episode, obviously, when we talked about Lex's descent across his 7 seasons and the finale on the show. It is one of my honorable mentions. I did rewatch it over the course of these trials of Smallville. I think ultimately why it didn't make the cut, although your argument in defense of it might have actually shifted my perspective on it, because the way Rosenbaum plays it and his performance as Lex across the series is top notch. But the way that evil Lex comes across is more unhinged than I would really kind of gravitate towards, even when we're talking about a fully villainous Lex. To your point, though, it's like, yeah, he is fully divorced from that other side of himself. So that does account for why he is the way he is. And yes, the Ring, I am the villain of the story, the Dark Knight Returns-esque dialogue about, paraphrasing here, but I want you to remember the one man who beat you. It is great. And those moments are really seared into my brain. But when I was looking at this from start to finish, again, ultimately it didn't make that cut, mostly because, like I said, Lex just came across more unhinged than I would view him, even when he's at his most villainous. But again, your points are all well taken. And it is an exceptionally fun episode.
Well, let me ask you then about Lionel here.
Yeah.
Right. So Lionel, he's on this good guy wearing sweaters, Lionel journey. And then, Evil Lex in this episode kind of asks all the questions that we as the audience are asking, like, is this an act? Is this real? Like, what's up with you, man? And then something gets unlocked in Lionel where he like switches back to that. And I'm like, I guess like Lionel, he's a very inconsistent character in these couple seasons. And they just didn't know what to quite do with him yet. After he gets activated by the crystal, right at the end of the season, like then he's solid good Lionel because he's got the Jor-El connection. I get that. But this like post-transference, pre-commencement Lionel, I don't know what his deal is. The show doesn't know. So if there's like a weaker part of this, it's like they use this episode to kind of like put him back into villainy mode. And that's to me, that's a little bit of a weaker part, but I do love the Lionel Lex scenes in this though. Right. Because this, again, a little bit of something that what's great about this series, Lionel Lex scenes. What do we have in this episode? Some great Lionel Lex scenes. So anyway, I just want to float that out at you.
No, it is an interesting aspect of this. And that moment when they're fencing and you see that fierce, savage side of Lionel come back out, it is such a standout. I agree. I think that period of time during season 4 is nebulous. And that's saying something because Lionel is always pretty nebulous in terms of what he knows, what his true intentions are. And I agree with you. I think from the time that he is possessed by Jor-El and then inhabited by Jor-El and hidden, I think we really see a Lionel whose intentions are good, even though his methods still remain morally dubious, to put it mildly. But that period from transference, I definitely think there is something that changes within him after that. But whether we get to the better intentioned Lionel at that point or not, I think really is up for debate. So it's an interesting kind of interlude in the overall Lionel arc. And I think to your point, I don't know that they really knew where the character was going. So we once again run into this situation, you and I talking about this, where I think we're affording them a lot of leeway and giving them the benefit of the doubt and trying to impart meaning and intention where there probably wasn't any. I mean, maybe that actually would be something I'd be curious to kind of hear from Alan Miles. It's like during that period of time, were they really toying with having him truly be, white hat Lionel, and then they realize this really isn't the right lane for the character? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, they thought, well, season 4 and 5 are winding down. Lex needs to be the big bad, so we'll just take Lionel off the board. And they're like, well, no, actually, we're going to go for a while. And John Glover seems to enjoy doing it. And we're going to keep him around. So so anyway, that's man, he is John Glover, Lionel Luthor, the character actor combination. I will forgive a lot of story inconsistency to see that guy do what he does. So I'm like, go for it, show.
He is the magnificent bastard. And he, it truly a remarkable performance. When he's at his worst, there's still something that is undeniably captivating about him. And at his best, really ends up playing a truly formative role, ultimately sacrificing himself for Clark. It really is a fascinating character and performance. And had it not been for John Glover, I don't know that we would have had 7 seasons of Lionel Luthor. Well, plus when we work in Earth 2 Lionel in the final season. So Right on Onyx. I would imagine for a lot of fans, Onyx is on that list. Maybe even higher, I would argue.
Yeah, maybe so.
All right, so that's your number 10. My number 10, of course, Doomsday. And that, of course, is a joke. All right, that's my one joke. I won't keep doing that. No, it's not Doomsday. And if you want to know why, Zach and I did almost 3 hours on his podcast talking about that.
Well, obviously, that's your number 1 episode. That's why it's a joke, because it's much higher on the list.
Just too anticlimactic. Anyway, my number 10, my actual number 10 is season 2, episode 12, Insurgents. And I rewatched this twice in recent weeks, and man, did I have a great time with it. So this is the episode where Lionel and Martha are held hostage at Luthor Corp as a result of events inadvertently set into motion by Lex. And it culminates with Clark making this leap, overcoming his fear of heights and making this leap from the roof of the Daily Planet building into Luthor Corp Tower. And this was just a tense, taut hour of television, and it captured so many of the dynamics that I think made the show, especially in those early seasons, so fascinating. I mean, the kickoff to this is that Martha can't celebrate her anniversary with Jonathan because she has to go work with Lionel in the city on a Sunday, right? So you have that marital strife. Clark is trying to insert himself and make the situation better. Jonathan does not receive that well. Clark enlists Lex's help, and Lex brings a helicopter to the farm, which only sets off Jonathan more. And that leads to one of my favorite Lex lines of the entire series, where he's like, "Mr. Kent, since the day I moved here, I've tried to be your friend, and all you've done is lecture me with sanctimonious platitudes, and I'm done with it." It's great. And you see, I think the Jonathan-Lex dynamic is really on full display in this episode, where you see that, yes, Lex has his issues with, Jonathan has his issues with Lex, but more than anything, he has his issues with Lionel and the Luthors generally. And you see him kind of taking that out on Lex. And then after the hostage situation is underway, Jonathan has to go hat in hand to Lex's office and ask to use that helicopter. You would remember this better than me since you've gone through all these episodes so specifically, one of the rare instances of Jonathan at the mansion, right?
Wow. I didn't even think about that, but it has to be. Right, I can think of some like early season 1 where like he like invites the Kents over under some kind of pretense or something. But you're right, John Schneider probably spent like 10 days total in his entire time on the show on that set. That's a good call.
Yeah, just to kind of have that dynamic, and of course,
sure, Mr. Kent, you can use my helicopter.
Yeah. And as you and I joke about all the time, but this is what a quaint period of the show's history where Metropolis was hours away and you needed a helicopter to get there fast.
Yeah.
By season 10 or by season 8, it would just be a short, be a short commute. Yeah.
Take the train.
And from Lex's point of view, this, again, you see a Lex whose methods are devious, yet he's not what he will eventually become. He enlists these criminals to bug Lionel's office. And then the criminals, and of course, Lex doesn't know that Lionel and Martha are going to be there. And the criminals go rogue and they actually end up executing their leader because they want to rip off Lionel's safe. So it's a Lex who set these events in motion for a devious purpose, but not what actually ends up happening, right? So the situation gets away from him. So it's interesting to see him kind of wriggling his way through that. And I always love the Kents working as a unit here. And there's a moment where Jonathan says to Clark when they're still at the farm, he's like, "Look, I'm not going to try to stop you. Like, we got to go save your mother, but be careful." And when we eventually get to the climax, when Clark breaks through and he stops the bad guys, this is when Martha has found out that Lionel has all these refined bars of meteor rock and maybe even and the octagonal disc and all of these files on the Kents. And she says to Clark, she's like, "You got to burn those files," which I love. I love when the Kents are in cahoots like that. She's like, "You got to burn those files." It's such a great episode, and very little fat to be had here. There are a couple of Lana scenes. This is the episode where she meets the wife of her biological father, Henry Small. But it's such a fleeting part of the episode. I mean, so much of this is just the tension of this hostage situation. And at the conclusion, you have what I think one of these iconic scenes of Lex just standing there as Lionel has walked away from him. And Lex is looking at the Kents having this happy, joyful family reunion. And if there's anything that kind of sums up his view of them and what we'll hear in season 5 in Vessel when he's like, I wanted everything you had.
Yeah.
It's there. So man, I love this episode.
You know, it's like the end of Jitters, but to the next level, right? Because on Jitters, at the end of Jitters, he's having his fake hug by Lionel for the press, and he sees the Kents have genuine happiness over there. And in this, it's even worse because Lionel's like, "Hey, Clark, way to go, son!" You know, and then Lex is just left alone. You know, and yeah, so Insurgents die hard, right, for Smallville, more or less, right? That's a great episode. It's not on my list.
Fair enough. It wasn't one that I would have initially anticipated would be on mine, but you talk about an episode that you could show someone and be like, this is Smallville. This is what Smallville can do. It's such a great hour, and it's co-written by Jeff Loeb of comic book fame. When he had his stint on the show. So strong. And I think the other thing too is that when we talk about the stakes of the show, you and I, we've shared our appreciation for seasons 8, 9, and 10, but we get so heavy into Doomsday, Zod, Darkseid. What I love about something like this is like, Clark's just got to get into the building, man. Like he's just got to get into the building, and there are alarms, and Maggie Sawyer is watching him. Yeah. And so his way through is looking up to the roof of the Daily Planet building. So it's such a great episode. And then just real quick, for years, I've never been able to get this out of my head. When Clark jumps into the building, I love the look on his face. He's like so pleased with himself. He's like, oh my God, that worked. But then when he grabs one of the guys and he asks about Martha, but his voice gets so high. He's like, where's my mom? Like, it's great. I've always found that amusing, but
we all have those lines here and there on Smallville that make us laugh just because, but see, now I feel bad that Insurgents isn't even on my list. It's on my top 10. It's not on my honorable mentions. It's a great episode. I guess if there was one thing that would sink it for me, because you gotta be so like everything counts when you're making these decisions of what's going to be your top 10. Those Henry Small scenes, I'm like, if those weren't there, this might be up here. Now, if you asked me what your top 10 list was like in the first half of the show, like if you asked me in season 4 or 5, I'm like, oh, the Insurgents for sure. Like I feel like when this episode came out, everybody's like, oh, this is a top episode, and it was, and I'm glad it's represented here on your list. So thank you for including it because I didn't.
No, of course, and even in our relationships episode, one thing that we really haven't talked about over the course of this event is the Martha Lionel dynamic, and that's such a key piece of this episode here. And look, those two performers clearly had a chemistry, and it was great to see them together. And for Lionel, Martha represents something good and pure. And it brings out a different side of his character. And for Martha, Lionel represents the life she could have had if she had stayed in Metropolis and not gone with Jonathan.
Specific to this version of these characters, right? If you say any other Martha Kent, like, what are you talking about? But this Martha Kent, who we know came from this family of like lawyers, and she's from the big city, and she had to give it up to go live with Jonathan, and like that worked, like, and we don't want it to happen, but we're like strangely compelled to it, you know. So whenever, like, it was always very interesting, and then especially when Jonathan passes away and he's all hanging around, like just the character intrigue, and that's what like earlier seasons having the, you know, frankly, the older characters have some more meat. They're not just supporting people in the background. Like this is their story here, right? So anyway, whenever Martha this is one of Martha's best episodes because we talk so much about like Lionel and Jonathan and Clark and Lex, right? Martha sometimes get kind of lost in the shuffle, like, even in these episodes where everybody has something to do. Like maybe she doesn't have quite as much to do, and so this is a great example of giving her a starring role.
For sure. All right, so we've done our number 10s. Your number 9?
My number 9? Season 3, Episode 2, Phoenix. Here's my sales pitch for why this is on my top 10. It's the culmination of this 4-parter from the end of Season 2 and the beginning of Season 3. This is such a great stretch of episodes. I had to pick something from this stretch. And I think because it's the end, like, I'm like, okay, well, this does it. Now, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, right? Episodes that they represent something from the whole show. Like something that you love from the show is represented in this episode. This episode has it all, right? It has a super battle between Clark and Jonathan to start it off. Back when the show had a budget. It's amazing. It's amazing stuff, right? A+ Lionel and Lex scenes here. They're both adversarial, like the one-liners back and forth, like, I scoured half the world for you. I picked the wrong half. Like, you know, like it's he's coming out of the shadows talking about when God asked Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. Like, it's so good. And then like to see the complicated relationship these guys have with each other is so on display. Like, this is like Lionel is so pleased to see his son, like son. Like, anyway, it's great stuff. And also Lionel, he's in his element almost more than any other episode here because he's got Morgan Edge, an A+ guest star in Rutger Hauer. What a get back then. I was like, Rutger Hauer, Blade Runner is on the villain from Blade Runner's on Smallville. What a world. Talking about, again, I just mentioned having like the older characters, older actors having stuff to do. He's in his own world talking to a contemporary. When do you see that with Lionel? Almost never, right? Lana Clark, Chloe handled very well in this episode because Chloe's, being all like, oh, well, Lana, you lied to me about your relationship. And Lana's like, listen, what I lied to you about is way different from what you lied to everybody about, because she was lying about Clark being gone. So like the degrees of the secret keeping, and Chloe's like, well, he's not in love with me. I'm like, damn, like they understood all these triangles there. Look, if you love Red Kryptonite Clark, he's here, right? I love the scene where he has to pretend to be Red Kryptonite Clark. He rips the door off the ass down the road back to Metropolis. It's great stuff. And then the Clark Lex reunion. I realized rewatching it mirrors the series finale. He's like, he says a line, he turns around, he's like, Lex, right? Thought you were dead, right? And anyway, just I mean, there was no intention of mirroring this at all, but when you see their final scene together, there's shades of that, and there's just so much action throughout the episode. And then Rosenbaum, one of his best performances too, with again weaving that comedy and villainy in. But he's like talking to Helen. I want to talk about Helen though before we're done with this little conversation. Weaving it in, like he's setting her up. He's like, "Oh, I wouldn't want to doze off." Like it's just incredible stuff. And I know you've talked about this too. What a needle drop at the end. White Flag by Dido. Like, what a needle drop. What a scene. All these characters are so well served. And to my point that I was just making, except for maybe Martha, like she trips when I'm working in just henchman. And that's pretty much her only contribution. But wow, this episode has it all. So that's why it has to be here.
Great pick. Not on my list, but a great pick. I am a big fan of that episode and that whole stretch of episodes. And yes, I have gone on a lot, especially when we did our relationships episode. I think that final scene with Dido's White Flag between Clark and Lana, to me, is the quintessential Klana scene of the show. I think it's perfect. I think it encapsulates their entire dynamic, hits all the beats in those few minutes. And everything else you brought up is spot on. All the Morgan Edge business. Lex, I thought you were dead. I was not unlike, where's my mom? I love Welling's delivery there, because it's just like, he's truly joyful to see Lex, but the way it comes off, I thought you were dead, man. No, that's a fantastic pick. Again, not on my list, but not for lack of value in the episode. It's such a great episode. While we're here, do you want to talk about Helen Bryce?
Let's talk about Helen. Like, okay. Interesting to introduce this character to be Lex's love interest in season 2, an age-appropriate love interest. What a concept for Lex Luthor. I like all of his age-appropriate love interests. I like Victoria in season 1, and then Helen here, and then of course Desiree Atkins and Heat.
Oh, okay? Of course,
for many reasons. So, and then she was like supposed to be this, show him, how to love and all this. But then it's all behind the scenes stuff. It's like they just decided, you know what? We could kill her, but you know what? Let's just make her a villain. And I'm like, I don't think that tracks at all. But I think the execution was so good here. I was like kind of cool with it, because he's like, oh, survival of the fittest. I guess you are Luthor now. That whole thing, right? And she's like, the only reason that she didn't shoot him is because she really fell in love with him. I'm not sure what the timeline is about, like, who got to her first, Lionel or Morgan Edge, or what's this all about. This is clearly a retcon. So it kind of bothers me, but I don't know. They pulled it off, but it still does not track at all with what they were doing with this character before now, right?
No, it doesn't. And I rewatched a lot of these Helen episodes, including Fever, when she takes Clark's blood, right? And that, of course, is a big bit of business that we'll see continue to pay dividends for seasons to come. The idea of Clark's blood and what it can do. But no, it so clearly was not what they originally intended for the character. And it's such a hard pivot. And it's not the only time we'll see this on the show. All of the Kara business towards the end of season 7, when she collapses in the kitchen, but then she was really just Brainiac all along. All of the pivots with Jensen Ackles' character, this is not the only time we'll see this. But with Helen, what really bummed me out is I loved the character, and I thought that the idea of Clark's doctor, who knows something is very different about him, being involved with Lex and maintaining her duty to her patient and the position that would put her in, it would have been interesting to continue to mine that. So I was disappointed that it was such a hard pivot that I don't really think you can account for. The only thing I kind of circle back to is at the end of season 2, Lex does confess that he had her office ransacked and he stole that blood sample. You could argue at that point something really kind of shifted in her, and then she
might have done the turn.
Yeah, because if the idea is she was really
a plant the whole time,
it's really, really hard to reconcile. Because even Lionel,
he says like, well, I never thought you would actually fall in love with Helen. I'm like, what does that mean? Like, you met into anger management class. Like, how far does this conspiracy go?
Well, so that's the thing, because the idea, I guess, that Lionel had hired her to spy on Lex, but then she seemed to have been working for Morgan Edge. Or she was just the Black Widow and she wanted Lex's money because she comes in with all the shopping bags and stuff.
Just such a stock villain, like Black Widow, evil wife, kill you for the insurance money move.
Yeah. So
shopping bags.
It never tracked. I do feel it was a disservice to the character and the actress. And I don't think we can really make sense of it. But like I said, maybe finding out about Lex having stolen the blood, like at that point she was just like, all right, I'm gonna get this guy, but it's still a hard pill to swallow, no pun intended, for a doctor.
And I'm at the end they're like, oh, should we send out some search parties for her? Lionel's just being facetious, and Lex is like, I'm already on it. And like, oh, he's kind of surprised. There was no need to revisit this character. There was nothing else to do with her at this point. So I'm glad they didn't try to bring her back or anything. But anyway, huge. We had to talk about it because she's huge. People forget she's a huge character in season 2. And the beginning of 3 here. So
yeah, no, for sure. No, Phoenix, man, a great pick. I love, so far we have different lists, which is great because that allows us to talk about more and to capture more of people's favorites. So your number 9 is Phoenix. My number 9 is season 4, episode 5, Run, the episode that introduced Bart Allen, aka the Flash, aka Impulse, here on the show, played by Kyle Gallner. Is this on your list at all?
This is an honorable mention for me.
Okay. Oh, this is great. More variety than I expected. So I revisited this episode when we did our Heroes of the DCU portion of the Trials of Smallville, and it held up great. I've always had fond memories of this episode. I knew, kind of going back to the methodology of this list, that I wanted to have an episode that kind of spoke to the show's ability to bring in the wider DC universe. And I know Justice is probably the more obvious pick for something like this, but for me, the more kind of emotionally satisfying story was the one in Run. And for all of the DC characters the show would bring in, and I think they did a great job with the vast majority of them, honestly, all the way through Booster in one of the final episodes of the series. But for me, their take on Bart remains my favorite, in large part due to Kyle Gallner's performance, but also just like you and I've talked about with Clark and Ryan and other characters as well. When Clark is in that big brother mode, there's really something special that I think is unlocked in his character. And so you see that big brother, little brother dynamic with the two of them. And more than anything, and we talked about this a lot when we did our heroes discussion, but each time a character, another hero comes on, it highlights something about where Clark is in his journey. And so with Bart, yeah, you have a kid who needs some morally straightening out. He's using his powers to steal, and he says runaway and life on the streets and all of that. And Clark is able to impart his wisdom there. But the flip of that is that Bart doesn't view his abilities as a curse, as a burden. And he makes that point to Clark. And in terms of them running down to Florida or having their race at the end, or the next time Bart shows up and they go get burritos, you see a lightness to Clark and a willingness to kind of indulge in his abilities ever so slightly that you normally don't see. And I love that aspect. I love what Bart brings out in him. And look, I know we're not relying too much on individual moments. At the same time, that final scene, that race between them, Rascal Flatts, feels like today.
Needle drop.
That has been seared into my brain forever. And I love that episode. And I love that depiction of this character. And again, just in terms of the context and like you said, showing what this series could do, this was a major first for Smallville. It's like, oh, we're going to bring in other DC heroes. And I thought they knocked it out of the park. And they did it while treading so lightly on Flash lore. I mean, yes, we get the different fake IDs with the other names and all of that, but it's like, it's Bart, right? It's the Impulse
Even
character.
to this day, you could debate, like, is it Bart Allen from the future? Is this Barry Allen? Is he going by Bart? Like, what is it? We don't know. And I like that. They really towed the line pretty well there.
Yeah, like they tread so lightly, and even when he talks about his origin and lightning, I mean, they do not get into the mythology, yet the character just still pops. Mm-hmm. So this remains a favorite of mine. So my number 9 is Run.
I think, we talked about in the first episode, like, well, how did Smallville influence things in your normal life? Like, normal life, you guys know what I mean. Everyday life. I think after this episode, Lance Laster and I, if you guys don't know, he's my best friend. We went to high school together, college roommates, still best friends. I think after this episode, like, we started doing the whole, like, head salute to each other. I'm pretty sure that's what we do. Like, if we were driving off a different way or something, I think that's where it started. I thought about that, but no, this is a fantastic episode and proved, as you said, that they could bring in the DC characters. And it was, oh man, it's an honorable mention for me for all the reasons you said. It's great. There is like Lana and Jason in here, and there's that map and all that. So again, I'm looking for any reason to like feel good about leaving stuff off my top 10. So. Fair.
And so just like Insurgents, this is an instance we get it, like just a few Lana scenes, but you and I talked about this when we kicked off this event, especially in those early seasons, kind of the thematic cohesiveness or those thematic parallels that you see. So in an episode called Run, about someone who can run really fast, you have Martha running away from Jonathan because she's afraid of his health issues, and she's spending more time at the Talon. And one of Lana's scenes is a rare instance of just one-on-one with Lana and Martha. And it's a great scene. And I think Lana actually imparts some valuable advice to
Martha's
Martha.
like, when did you get so wise? Yeah.
Yeah. And so, we have the beginning scene with Jason where he notices her tattoo, and then the final scene when she takes him to the caves and she shows him. Mm-hmm. So not unlike Insurgents, you could lift those couple of scenes right out of the episode. But for me, they didn't weigh it down enough. They were so fleeting that I had to still go with Run.
I did love the little subplot of Jonathan. Like, all he wants to do is like spend time with his wife and hang out with his son. He's like, hey, you want to watch the game, Clark? Hey, the people just keep blowing him off. I feel so bad for Jonathan that episode.
I know. Yeah, no, I know. I think Jonathan really, with Martha, really was looking to have some one-on-one time. And I think that's the implication at the end, that they're going to have that. But it also, the other thing that makes me laugh about this episode, because this so stood out at the time and upon rewatch, this is the one where Jonathan says to Clark, like, you're a 17-year-old boy, Clark. And look, we know they're in high school, the constant references to their school year and all of that. But when you have a character,
when you put numbers like
explicitly say you're 17 years old, meanwhile Tom Welling is what at that point, 29?
He's 27. 27 at this point. He's 10 years older. Yeah.
All right. So that always makes me laugh. But such a fun episode, man. So that's my number 9. What is your number 8?
My number 8, season 6. Episode 11, Justice.
Okay. That is one of my honorable mentions. It didn't make the list.
Oh, wow.
I know.
Goodness.
Because I wanted that one representation of the wider DC world, and I went with Run, but it is an honorable mention. So go for it.
All right. So I feel better now. It's on my list because this is actually probably dropped a little bit for me for the very reasons that it's in your honorable mention. Because it's like, well, is this Smallville? No, but it's amazing. We just talked about Run, Bart coming back. Like, he is... Of all the heroes, they do an A+ job with all the heroes in this because they've set up, it's a payoff. We've obviously met Green Arrow this season. We met Aquaman last season. We met Cyborg last season. We met Impulse 2 seasons ago. And they're all coming together in this team. It's great stuff. And every character is used to their specific capability that, there's reasons why they're all doing what they're doing, which is great. But hey, that continued bond between Clark and Bart, even though he gets kidnapped, right? They have that, hey, burrito, amigo, and all, whatever that chemistry is between them, it carries on here. And Alexis in full villain mode, all right? He captures Bart, and I want a ponytail, disappointment abounds, right? Famous stuff from him. Aquaman and the fish jokes line is so good. The reference to Aquaman asking about Lois, and Clark's like, hey, why don't you ask your boss? Speaking of them, I really ship Oliver and Lois. I ship Oliver and Tess. I ship Oliver and Lois. Like, ship Oliver with everybody, and they have a great chemistry. It's on full display in this episode, and you feel sad when they break up, because you're like, obviously this is a pre-Arrow world, so you kind of you thought you knew who Green Arrow was going to end up with. You knew Oliver and Lois weren't going to end up together. This was inevitable. The whole cool guys don't look at explosions, walk away. It's iconic. It's an icon. If there's ever a montage about this series, that shot's in there. It's iconic stuff where they all walk away. Chloe takes this is her first real step towards being Watchtower, which is like her second act as a character in the last half of the show, is being this Justice League, Watchtower. And then, Lionel here just running interference is amazing. He's like, Lex confronts Lionel about somebody matched Clark's description. He's like, oh, Martha cooked and Clark had 2 helpings of peas or whatever. It's just insanity. But amazing at the same time. And then there's no Lana in this episode. I sound like such a Lana hater because I'm like, well, there's a lot of scenes that episode, Anthony. That's why it's not on my top 10. I sound like a Lana hater. I won't be. Just stay tuned to my list. But she's not in. This is the first episode she was never in because she's off in Europe shopping for wedding dresses with Nell. So season 6, right? Like Sana, all that nonsense. This stays pretty clear of all that because she's just not even here. I mean, what else do you guys say about Justice? Right? Everybody knows it, right? I mean, it's what a moment, what a seminal moment for the show. And it's not this episode's fault, but I think it promised things that maybe the show didn't think it would have to pay off, and certainly did it because we're like, well, we'll see them again at some point now and then, but never like this, right?
Very true. I mean, we would see further configurations of the League, but always in smaller groups, like at the beginning of season 8 in Odyssey, the end of season 8 in Doomsday, and kind of one-offs here and there, like, AC and Mera in season 10, Patriot, like they'd pop back up, but we wouldn't have the force that you see here. No, this was a ton of fun and definitely deserves credit, I think, for being ahead of its time. Ken and I talked about this one a couple episodes ago. It's like, I feel like for a new viewer to Smallville now, it's easy to look at this, maybe even look down on it after what we've gotten in the Arrowverse and the DCEU and the MCU. Like you've seen so many instances now of heroes coming together in full costume with their powers and everything. This was so early in the game. I mean, it was ahead of the game, and it deserves a lot of credit for it. And it is a ton of fun. Like I said, I think really for me, it came down to this or Run. And I guess for me, the moments of when a team finally comes together and they all have their mission at the Luthor Corp plant, and of course that slow-mo walk away from the explosion, like that, there's such standout moments. But when I looked at the episode as a whole and rewatching it, not that it's slow to get going, but it does take a little while before we get to that full team. So that's why ultimately it didn't make it. But it is one of my honorable mentions and could have very easily been on the list instead of Run. And in fact, in earlier iterations of my list, it was. Yeah. So there were some real close calls. But yes, the scene, when Lex is like, oh, she's shopping with Aunt Nell. She's so pleased with himself that he's nailed down Lana. But then, yes, Lionel covering for Clark was great. It's like Martha made pot roast and new potatoes. Yeah, and Clark had 2 helpings. That's it. Yeah.
I got to say, though, the continued Lex Green Arrow rivalry is great in this. There's only one more episode about it in the whole show. Well, I guess season 8 really is a continued Lex Green Arrow rivalry when you think about it, but you see my meaning, right? But that's great. And then the whole like, what I do best line for Green Arrow, that's become a meme for me. And Lance and I quote that to each other. I've made a GIF out of it. Like, it's just one of those lines that sticks out to you and is going to fire in my brain cells for the rest of my life is what I do best from Green Arrow.
Yeah, it is. Well,
because of the voice changer is really what makes it.
No, I hear you. And it's funny when you mentioned Ollie and his romantic partners. And of course, we know I guess it's nebulous in the future. Is he still with Chloe or not? But she ends up being his final romantic partner on the show. And yet in this episode, when she's taking the elevator up, and it's Mr. Queen, right? So it's by rewatching it, I'm like, oh man, it's so weird where we would eventually go versus where we started. So far, 3 for 3. We have different picks. This is fascinating.
I love that.
Well, actually, my number 8, we'll see if this is on your list or not, but my number 8 is, I said I was treading lightly with the premieres and finales, but I do have the season 1 finale, Tempest.
Oh, yes, that's my number 6.
Right on, man.
Yeah, look at us.
It made the list.
I thought I was going to have to like really make a case for that being on here. I am so happy. Please take it away. Take it away.
It's such a good, as you and I have talked about, and as I'm sure as Smallville fans recognize, the show generally pulled out all the stops when it came to their premieres and finales. And they were big moments. And like we said, they saved up budget for it and all of that. But as we get deeper into the show, the finales in particular really do tend to revolve a lot around the mythology, around Jor-El and the stones and the fortress and Zod and the phantoms and all that business, Zod and Brainiac.
Doomsday.
Season 1 was a tornado, right? It was a tornado. But more importantly, what that episode about, I think it was a really beautiful culmination of all of these interpersonal dynamics and storylines that we're building throughout the season. Major and minor. And the fact that in the series premiere, in the pilot, you have Whitney and his cronies stringing Clark up on the Scarecrow. And over the course of the season, they try to do some character rehabilitation for Whitney. Whether it works or not, your mileage may vary. But you get to the end here as he's leaving to join the army. And he has this moment with Clark. And he's like, we had a weird year. I thought you were trying to steal Lana, but you're a good guy. And I want you to promise me you'll look out for her. And that's just one instance. But I feel like there were so many great payoffs. All of the Lex Lionel tension. I mean, my God, the episode starts off with that banger of a sequence of Lionel getting off the helicopter, greeting everybody, giving this speech where he builds them up and then tells them he's closing the plant and then gets right back on the helicopter. Mm-hmm. It's such a good sequence. And you get to that final scene between Lex and Lionel where you have that beam about to impale Lionel and Lex standing there with the blood running down his face. And Lance and I talked about this when we talked about Lex. It's like, at this point in the show, you didn't know. Right? No. It's like, oh, this is the moment. He's going to go dark. He's going to let Lionel die. You didn't know. And it was just, I mean, again, for the most part, I'm trying to be objective. I'm trying to kind of divorce the memories of watching. But I cannot shut off that part of my brain that goes back to being a kid and watching that finale. It was just such a great payoff.
Oh, man.
To everything that had been building. Clark and Chloe finally having their almost moment at the dance there, about to kiss before we get the interruption. My God, Lana standing in front of the Twisters and then later being in the car as the car is getting pulled up and Clark shows up. Clark! And he runs into it. Jonathan going after Roger Nixon. And Martha.
Let's not let him destroy this family.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. It's like, Jonathan, what are you doing? I will not let him destroy this family. It's like, what is Jonathan going to do? So all of it, the key, the ship, I mean, just everything came together. And look, along the way, you have Lex tying Clark's bow tie. In the barn before his dance, right? For as dark as that relationship will get in the years to come. I mean, this is still in that era where they're friends, and that moment, you know, they don't have a ton of interaction in the finale, but that moment is definitely a standout. But it was just, again, a great payoff to all of those interpersonal dynamics, I thought, against the backdrop of this quote unquote villain in the form of a force of nature. It's singular. When we look at, it's a singular instance out of all of these finales that we're talking about. It really stands out.
No, that's a great point. I don't think I thought about it that way before, but you're right. Every other finale premiere is some Kryptonian thing or whatever. And it's nice that this is just beyond your control. It's nature. You can't control it. And like this, hear me out here, right? You tweak a couple of things. This could be a series finale. Like if they're like upperclassmen or something or whatever, right? And like they're all like this could be the prom, and then Clark could fly to save Lana and Jonathan from the tornado. The ship comes on, is like, hello, I am Jor-El, right? Who knows about Lana? I mean, but like Lex lets Lionel die and becomes the evil Lex, and then at the time, you know, hear me out here. I gotta mention, right? So Chloe, hear me out. You know where I'm going. So Chloe tells Clark, "Hey, Clark, I have a nightmare that you're going to leave me alone at that dance to go run off to see Lana at that bus station. If you do, I will never talk to you again." And you're like, "Oh my God, he did it!" And she's pissed at him, doesn't talk to him for years, and they meet again in the Daily Planet. She's Lois Lane. If this is a 1 year show, and the show gets canceled after 1 year, that you do the TV movie, and that's what it is, or the follow-up comic book, and that's what, like, all the pieces are here. And just it's a masterclass of the slow burn, because like the storm, everybody's talking about the storm rolling in, and the sky is getting darker. And again, it's like back when they had a budget. You know, they had all those extras at the Luthor Corp plan and the helicopters and those incredible shots of Lex on the helipad. Those would be lifted out of a Superman movie.
Yeah.
Right? Of him just watching Superman take off, or him being pissed about that. And what an amazing supporting character Roger Nixon is. This guy was back in like the 4th episode, and he's so smarmy, and I love his relationship with Lex and like that dynamic, like because they run into Clark and Nixon acts like he knows Lex, and Lex has to act like he doesn't know him, and then later on Nixon's like, I'm surprised you even remembered my name. It's this great stuff. The octagonal disc, really, I mean, it had been introduced in the previous episode. Little did we know this was going to be like the linchpin of the whole, blow up the ship, whatever, but this disc will last the entire series, right? Pete, Clark, Lana, Chloe love triangle stuff going on here. It's weird because like this is why I was so confused for years on this show. I'm like, what do you want me to like? Who am I rooting for? Like Lana has a boyfriend, but she's now jealous of Clark. Like you feel like their positions have reversed some, and you're like, interesting the dynamics there where she's jealous of his relationship. And I just love how innocent everyone is in this episode. Yeah, especially after all we've been through. You go back and you see like Chloe pinning a boutonniere on Clark, and it's like, oh, did I prick you? No, of course not, because he's steel. He didn't feel that. I mean, it's little moments like that, and it just also because I rewatched it specifically for this because I hadn't watched it in a long time because obviously doing the podcast coverage. The little scene where like obviously this truck blows up, right? Nixon sets up this truck to blow up. Clark's talking to his parents about it. He's like, oh yeah, I didn't even feel the heat, and now I don't have any bruises this time. Like, oh, as you get older, your body must be getting stronger. Like this is back when they were tracking that stuff, and I don't know, man. It's amazing stuff, and that scene you mentioned of Clark and Lex in the loft, they're talking about like relationships built on lies, and lucky ours isn't. And Clark's like, yeah, lucky us. It's still innocent though because they're friends, but it's like so compelling, this early stuff between them. So good. But we gotta take a brief second. We're talking a lot about it, but it's on both of our lists, so it's fair play. We gotta take a second and talk about Whitney and Lana because he says we've been together a long time, and I know you mentioned this in your relationship episode.
Yeah,
like how I don't. You're 18 and she's 15, and then if we subtract this, then he was in junior in high school dating a 7th grader or something. Like I don't understand.
Yeah.
How long you've been together.
Like I said, get off Jensen Ackles' back here. Enough with this Jason Teague. Oh, he was too old. A 1-year difference, and they met before he worked at the school, and she was 18. The Whitney business is far more troubling because, like I said, I mean, if it's just 1 year they've been together, right? He's a junior in high school and she's an 8th grader. I mean, what are we doing here?
That's still weird. Yeah.
What are we doing here? And it didn't help that I think Eric Johnson is a solid performer, but as much as we joke about, Tom Welling, it didn't look like he was 17, but Eric Johnson really did not look like he was a high schooler, especially paired with Kristen
Craig, who was like 19, 20 at the time, was much more age appropriate than the rest of them. Yeah.
Overall, did the Whitney character rehabilitation with his ill father who eventually passes and eventually warming towards Clark, did it work for you, or were you never able to overcome what he does to Clark in the pilot?
A little bit. The haircut also helped. I know that sounds shallow, but the clean cut helps a lot. Take it a little more seriously. They clearly, I give the show credit that they identify well, this character isn't really working. They give him that kinetic. They give him that episode, and that was like one of the worst episodes ever.
Yep. Not
going to appear on our list on any form of our top list here. And obviously they're going to write him off at some point. So sure, but I like that last scene where he's like, like you said, you and I have had a weird year, and Clark, and he's like I did some things I'm not proud of, and no, I'm sorry. And Clark's like, hey, I appreciate that. And that was like a real, genuine human moment between people, not about powers or kryptonite. It was about just a couple of guys that were jealous over a girl. And anyway, the simplicity of it, and it's these early years, the groundedness of it. And they kind of somehow they won me over for Whitney and Lana, like more on Whitney's, his point of view on the whole thing. He plays everything. It's the love theme of the first season, right? Yeah, really. He plays on the CD player.
Yeah.
The CD player. Anthony sticks a CD player in a boombox. Incredible stuff. And then, dude, Remy Zero shows up. This is the best episode for music, period. Remy Zero showed how meta can you get to have the people who play the theme song show up at the school dance and play the theme song? Yeah, Remy Zero. Why do you think I requested it? I also love their other song, Perfect Memory.
Yes. So yeah. I'm sure we had a similar experience where, again, in an era before you could buy or stream a single song, you bought the album.
But and CD.
So, listen to all those Remy Zero songs. And yeah, Perfect Memory is great. And yeah, product placement, Pete. We always love that. But yeah, no, just like real grounded human stakes. I mean, Whitney's going off to war. Like that's his exit from the show, is he's going into the military. And we talk about the ships. It's like, was I ever invested in Whitney and Lana? No. Yet when she gets out of the truck at the end and she kisses him,
I felt you can't help but feel something. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
But when they had that picnic earlier, did she think he was going to propose to her?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe
because he's like, I want to show you something. She's like, wait, hey, wait. Like I didn't catch. I remember not thinking that originally, and then I know when I did the podcast, I remember watching that thing. I'm like, oh, is that what they were saying? Aren't you 14? It's not leak anyway. Well, that's its own thing. And then hey, I'm a Chloe guy. I'm a Clark shipper. Like this is as close as you get to happiness if you're on this show. So this is, what a moment, what an era of this show. And this was, like I said, this if Smallville had been canceled after one season, I would have been like, man, what a great episode, like to go out on. If you had, like, of course we're glad it went 10 years, but you get my point when I say that, right?
Yeah, for sure.
That's sorry. I'm still talking. This is the last thing I'm
going to say. Go for it, man.
Lana says something to Clark because they talk about real world stakes. They close the Luther plant. People gonna lose their jobs. Like, people they gotta move. So Chloe and her dad are moving back to Metropolis. Whitney's gonna join the Marines. And Lana tells Clark, I guess we're the ones left behind. I'm like, see, that's the comic book Lana Lang. She's one of the ones left behind. I'm like, there it is. So like, they say the Superman for All Seasons influenced Smallville, and I see the influence in this episode with the tornado and all that stuff. Like, I really feel it here in this episode. So anyway, I'm just so happy that it's on your. I thought I was like season 1 representation. Here we are, man. I'm so happy it's on your list and my list.
Yeah, no, it's such a great episode. And you mentioned the plant closing. One of my favorite scenes in this episode, if for whatever reason it always jumped out at me. Not that you should necessarily take philosophical or life advice from Lex, but when he and Clark are talking about the plant being closed, Lex says something about how people are going to assume that he either ran it into the ground out of incompetence or that he did it on purpose to be able to go back to Metropolis. And for him, letting people think that he did it on purpose was preferable because he says being reviled is the lesser evil. Mm-hmm. And thankfully, I guess I've never put that into practice in my life, but I remember at the time, I guess I was just struck by that mental calculus of like, this is not a good situation. People are going to have one of two takeaways, but this is it's better to be reviled than to have people think that you're incompetent. It just made an impression on me.
Well, I think especially in these especially season 1 too, because they had to really define Lex Luthor and who he was. I feel like you used to say a lot of stuff like this around Clark to kind of just highlight their different worldviews, And I feel like they kind of get away from that at some point, but I found that very interesting because like this is the way this dude thinks, and he doesn't think like a normal person, right? I mean, he's Lex Luthor, so insightful.
Yeah, and then of course, cry havoc and let's slip the dogs of war.
Dude, I thought he was gonna let Lionel die there. Like I remember, like, well, this is it. Yes, people don't realize this, y'all. Guest star Lionel Luthor. He's not a main character yet. He's Lex's evil dad. And honestly, if he would have died here, he still would have been a great character, right? I mean, I just think he was great. But then we think we're gonna have 6 more years of this layered performance and all. We already talked about kind of how they kind of go all over the place with him. But they had me buying it. I thought Clark was gonna fly. But that summer of 2002 was something else, man. Waiting for the show to come back. So
yeah, no, for sure. All right, so yeah, that was my number 8, and that's your number 6, right? So we mark
Correct.
That down when we get there. Your number 7.
My number 7 is season 5, episode 12, Reckoning.
Oh, that's low. That's
low. Oh, is it?
No, it's all good. It's all good. It is on my list. That is my number 3.
Wow. So, I mean, I have dabbled in top 10 lists before, right? For this show, right? Reckoning used to not be on there. Like, it used to not. I was like, like, here's the thing. And I realize this now. Doing the podcast, this is one of those things you asked me, reassessment.
Yeah,
huge reassessment here. This is huge for me. You watch this at the time and I'm like, man, like, you kept Lana and killed Jonathan, like, and also extremely sad. So yes. I don't want to like revisit this, so like, I thought Vengeance was actually more emotionally powerful to me because I watched the videotape and the tears and all that, because that's the more grounded version of someone passing away versus, the Kryptonian time travel stuff. Right. But, rewatching this and I struggled with my placement of this too. Like, I don't even I'm still not sure about my placement for half this stuff on this top 10 list, honestly, but had to be here because what a well-oiled machine of an episode this is. Right. I mean, it's we talked about how Tempest is all like leading one way, Reckoning is all leading one way, and then even from like the A+ music choice from James Blunt's You're Beautiful, right? They play it twice with the reset. I'm like, I don't know what that is, but like that works so well.
Well, and I'll Never Be With You is what they really zero in on in that second round. Yeah,
I need a break from us. Never be with you. It's like, oh, look at y'all. This is one of Tom and Kristen's both best episodes acting. Like I always say, Tom's great at playing the villain and then being like a big brother, maybe with comic relief, but no, Tom is A+ in this episode. Like when he's talking to when Clark's talking to Lana, he's like Kristen's like 1,000 times, just feels so natural. Kristen's just so great in this. She's so genuine and happy and supporting. Like, this is more of the Lana we wanted to see when we did like Lana, right? Because we, again, as anti-Lana as I seem to be, I liked Lana a lot on the show. I just also didn't like her a lot. This is the Lana we liked. So cool, so much cool stuff. The from going from the fortress to the from the cave to the fortress, and the scope of the fortress here, right? And then of course what does Superman do now, Anthony? You know what? You've been watching at least version of Superman. He crushes coal. He makes the diamond ring. Superman 3 reference for a ring for Lana. He does the same thing there. His moments with his parents, right? Jonathan and Martha have a couple moments too. Like, you don't think about it, but the necklace thing where Jonathan has to help her and then she can't put it on for the funeral. It's like, your dad always should help me with this. And then I gotta say, Michael does a great job too. Like, Rosenbaum doesn't get a lot in this episode, but the double scene, the time loop scene where he's drinking by himself and depressed, like, it's this perfect mix of like, he's lonely, but he's drunk, and then he feels betrayed. And he's like, of all the times you came to me, like, I'm a big Lex discovering Clark's secret guy because like, that's all over the place in my top 10 list. And I mean, it's on your list too. I don't want to go on and on, but let me just say one more thing. Chloe is perfect in this too. The show understands her place in the relationship between Clark and Lana, because like, he tells her like, oh, I told her my secret. Oh, we're getting married. She's like, oh, but she just said, you know what, Clark, no one deserves to be happy. If anyone deserves to be happy, it's you. But then we have the time loop, and he's like, oh God, like, I told Lana my secret. Then I asked her to marry me, and she's like, whoa. Chloe says, well, what was my reaction? And he's like, something like that. Like, that's so subtle, but it shows me the show understands like the weird dynamics. Anyway, it's just, and then of course it all converges with Lionel and Jonathan and all that stuff. So I've talked enough. I have one more thing I want to say about it, but let me toss it to you, man.
No, man. I mean, I echo all of that. I mean, the milestone 100th episode of the show, and it just, again, I agree with everything and I won't repeat it, but it runs the gamut of emotion on the show. And I think that's the thing where you go from the highest high, the joy of Lana knowing the secret, accepting his proposal, them finally unlocking that dynamic that had been closed off to them and the audience. And then you pivot from that to the tragedy of her death and the do-over. And then, of course, where we end up with Jonathan. And so it runs the gamut of emotion. It's this watershed moment for the show. I guess I knew it would always be on my list, but I think what ultimately landed it higher than I originally intended was a little bit of a realization that I had, which is, I think any reservations I've had about Reckoning have had more to do with what came after, as opposed to the episode itself. And I don't want to punish the episode for that. I mean, and we talked about this in the ships episode, but it's like, it was hard to see Lana and Clark in that place of honesty and then have to put that genie back in the bottle in subsequent episodes and revert to that tired dynamic. But that's not necessarily the fault of Reckoning. I mean, it is based on the way that episode ends, but just looking at Reckoning from start to finish, it was so satisfying and heartbreaking, and hand in hand with all this with Jonathan, do I wish that, knowing that we would get 10 seasons, do I wish that Jonathan had remained a part of the show for longer? Yeah, I mean, of course. But in this specific moment, this lesson that Clark learns where he tempts fate, and in the end, it's his father who loses his life. It's so powerful. And man, for years, I always wished that Jonathan, as he was dying, had said something. But in subsequent watches, I actually really love the restraint that the show displays, because Schneider is able to display so much when he looks at Martha and he looks at Clark, and it's so powerful. I mean, it's just, I remember, again, really reflecting on all of this, I remember watching the show that night that it aired. And like we talked about, this was past the point of me watching with my parents. I was watching on my own, but they still knew I would talk about it all the time. And I remember coming downstairs after watching that episode, and my mom was like, "How was it?" And I remember my answer. I was like, "It was amazing. It was like, that was my takeaway from that episode." And again, I think in terms of where we see the show go, kind of falling back into this rut with Clark and Lana, really missing Jonathan. We're entering the dropout era of the show that you and I have talked about. I think that's kind of colored my view of Reckoning, but from start to finish, it runs the gamut. It has some seminal moments, things that you've been dying to see, even if it gets undone. And look, for any Superman fan, you watch the show, Jonathan in particular, you don't know exactly which way it's going to go, because we are in the modern era of comics where Jonathan's alive, but we do know that the showrunners took a lot of cues from the Christopher Reeve movies. So I think, I mean, tell me how you felt, but I think all along you kind of figure at some point Jonathan's going to clutch his arm and go down. And I feel like it was just a matter of time, and this got us here. And as hard as it was, and yes, it's a tough watch, the second half in particular, but it's such a standout, man.
No, I agree with you about, I think we all kind of knew Jonathan was on borrowed time. I mean, even way back in season 1, they're like, all those things, I even mentioned that, all those things I can do, all those powers, I couldn't even save him. Nicodemus, he's like, all my abilities, and then I can do to help him. Like, they know that's in our subconscious there with Jonathan. And the thing about like the wheel of fate or whatever, right? It's interesting. I don't think the episode even realizes this. I don't know if it does. I don't think if people realize this, because there's this great moment, right, where they do the redo and we're on the road, and you don't think about why was Jonathan on the road there and with Clark, and then you realize why he was later. He does the classic John Schneider stopping of the car that he learned on Dukes of Hazzard, just did his own stunts as a driver, fantastic stuff. But Lana is saved, and she sees Jonathan drive by in slow motion, and they have like this eye contact, and it's almost like fate has been transferred over to him now.
Yeah.
Epic stuff. However, I think everybody forgets, and I don't even the show realize this, Lois was going to die in that Talon apartment because she fell off the stool getting some snacks, and the sink was on, and Lana wasn't there to help her because her and Clark's day had gone separately. So Lois would have died, which that takes you to the Lexmas future where Lois is not around, and maybe Clark and Chloe are together. Like, look at all these. And then Lana and Lex got together after look, season 5, man. Like, there was something there they were going for. And then in my grand theory here of everything being connected, this helped me like appreciate and understand Clark more moving forward. Like, look, Lexmas was for Lex what Reckoning is for Clark. They had this perfect day, and they spend the rest of their, well, at least the rest of their lives on the show for a while chasing that perfect day, right? Lex had this perfect future with Lana where he's going to do everything in his power to like get with Lana and make that his happily ever after, as we see, and he goes into nefarious means to do it. Clark saw this happily ever after with Lana. So that's why he's still hung up on her, because he knows that, like, oh man, if I ask her to marry, she'll say yes, and we could have been great. But at the same time, he even says this to Chloe. Chloe, she knew my secret for less than a day, and she's dead. So of course he's going to be like, I can never tell Lana my secret, because that I understand that fear. So as frustrating as it was for us for the next, year and a half, you understand why he doesn't tell her his secret, because like as far as he knows, she's dead when he tells. Like, yeah, that's kind of silly. He's a young guy. He's impulsive. We would all do that. If our girlfriend died and we got a crystal, like, here, you can undo it. I'm like, well, give it to me. Jarrell's like, hey man, there's consequences. He doesn't care. He's distraught. He takes the crystal. He does what he does. Anyway, that's just more layers on this episode that you can either project onto it, or I think maybe there was some intention there. It's just really well constructed, and I'm glad that I've reassessed and put it up in the top 10 where I truly think it belongs.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. It's like, as much as it's easy to be frustrated with Clark or the show, why doesn't he tell her? Like we talked about, the show, and your mileage may vary, but the show gives reasons why Clark doesn't. At the end of season 3, all that business with Pete, when Pete gets roughed up by the FBI agent, right as Clark is about to share his secret with Lana, and he realizes what a burden it's been on Pete. It drives Pete away. He leaves town. He doesn't want to put that on Lana. And then similarly here, it's like he tells Lana, and to your point, it's like, yeah, half a day and she's dead. And I know you and I have talked about a version of the show where we don't redo the day, and instead we move forward with Lana dead and Lex seeing Clark super speed in, and it's wild to kind of think about. But in terms of what we got here, again, just in terms of that episode in and of itself, Again, it warrants the spot that it does on our lists. And one other thing, just real quick to mention, I know there's that deleted scene of Clark bringing Jonathan's body to the fortress to plead with Jor-El. Ultimately, I understand why it got cut, but it was, I'm glad that it exists and that we got to see it. It also has this weird effect because you don't have Jor-El's side of it. So it just sounds like this is all falling on deaf ears, which kind of has an impact in and of itself. But I'm glad that it exists because of course Clark would try, right? Like, even though Jor-El said there's only one crystal, it's like, well, of course he would, maybe.
Well, he's not on source. I mean, at this point, we're in this magic territory. Even though he says we were not gods, Kal-El. I'm like, you kind of are. You kind of are gods. It was. It's an interesting curiosity. I'm glad I think they made the right decision because it's just like, God, he takes his dad's dead body to the fight. God, think about that. Like, it's just strange. I don't like it. But you're right. He would try to do something. So it does, and then I think he says like he's the only father I'll ever have, right? He kind of doubles down on as in defiance against Jor-El, which he would do.
Yeah.
But no, I'm glad that was the right decision to take it out, I think.
And truly, the last thing, and I want to say, we love the Christopher Reeve movie series. However, one of the things that's always bugged me is that there's all this talk in Superman the movie about you must never interfere in the course of human events, and Superman changes time, and it's all good. And I feel like here, at least, you see the consequences, right?
Yeah.
There had to be this balance in the universe. If it's not Lana, it's going to be somebody else. And so this is the price that's paid. And so I'm glad that there had to be consequences to this. And so it felt appropriate, as hard as it was, to say goodbye to the character.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And this echoes for the rest of the show, right? Season 9, season 10. He's talking about Booster Gold about this,
Yeah.
About time travel. So there you go.
I know. Hell, at the end of season 9 in Salvation with Zod, he's like, I killed my father.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa, all right, man.
I remember when I saw it, I was like, the double take. Like, oh, I guess so. Like, it's
I know. It's like, all right, pump the brakes here a little bit, man. Go a little easier on yourself, but he'll get there. All right. So that's your number 7. My number 7, I know is on your list. I suspect it's a lot higher than it is on mine, but it is season 2, episode 17, Rosetta.
Yeah, that's number 3 on my list.
Okay. Oh, so our 3 and 7 were flipped.
There you go.
Interesting. So of course, this is the iconic Christopher Reeve episode. Christopher Reeve as Dr. Virgil Swan. This is where you have Clark being called by the cave. He's having these dreams. He's sleepwalking / sleep flying, and eventually defies Jonathan and Martha and places the key in the slot in the cave wall. And he's downloaded with the Kryptonian language. And then his heat vision activates and he carves the symbol for hope in the barn, on the side of the barn. And that arouses the attention of Dr. Virgil Swan, Christopher Reeve, who reaches out to him. And we have this, again, iconic meeting, passing of the torch between Superman actors, where Clark learns at long last he is Kal-El of Krypton, and Krypton is no longer there. And there's still more to come in the episode. But, well, let me toss it to you. Why does it warrant number 3 on your list?
Well, Christopher Reeve, the once and future Superman, he's my favorite Superman. And having him appear on the show was just such an amazing stamp of legitimacy, right? Not that the show needed it, but that really, like, again, I say this all the time, seasons 2 and 3, like the pop culture zenith of this show. And that was part of it, him being a part of it. And to have him be the character who tells Clark about his origins, interesting, right? I think it's very interesting that they, obviously, at this point, it's post-accident. So Christopher Reeve is paralyzed, right? He's in a wheelchair. So they kind of take inspiration. They make him like a Stephen Hawking-esque scientific genius, which I think was a pretty inspired choice. And if it were, I think we might have mentioned this talking about, and when we talked about Clark's journey, but it's like, if it were just some random scientist guy and it wasn't Christopher Reeve who told Clark this, I'm like, wait a minute, he should learn that from his spaceship. But again, Smallville's a journey, all this stuff. You want to parse that stuff out. But then to have Christopher Reeve be the one to do it, he says Kal-El and Krypton for the first time, and you see Clark just reach out for that screen and touch it because it's as close as he's been to his biological parents. Like that, just a very monumental moment. It's meta because it's a monumental moment for the character, but also for the series, and they couldn't have done it better. It was so delightfully done. and to tease him, to build him up through the whole episode. We're like, oh, he's this man of the year on Times Magazine. He's a billionaire, and all these. Why is he interested in you? And then the reveal, of him, like even like through like the planets and all that stuff. He's walking around looking for him, and I rewatched it for this, and because I hadn't watched it in a bit, and I've had Christopher Reeve on the mind because the Superman, the Christopher Reeve story just came out, and the documentary, which I highly recommend if anyone hasn't checked it out. I'm not sure how it's going to be available. It'll probably be streaming at some point soon, but I highly recommend it. Anyway, that's been on my mind recently. So he puts in a hell of a performance. I mean, he's got facial expressions and inflections and for a man who was a quadriplegic at this point. I mean, this man, he came to play. And Tom Welling has even said this, talking about it. He's like, yeah, he was supposed to be there for like 4 hours, and he stayed for 12, and they wanted to, his assistant was like, I'm going to take you out of here. And he's like, no, we're going to finish this. And anyway, just across the board, I'm talking all this like external stuff for the show, but it brings so much to it to know that he had that commitment to it. And the show treats it with such importance too. Like we have the John Williams themes are in this episode, not only the Superman fanfare, but the Krypton themes as well. And then a fantastic ending where they find they take what they find out is the ship's heart, they put it in, and it says, they are a flawed race, rule them with strength, my son. That is where your greatness lies. On the third planet from this star Sol, you'll be a god among men. And Clark said, what kind of planet am I from? And Jonathan says, I'm your father. I raised you. I know you better than anyone. He hugs him, and Clark's reassured, but then the camera does this 360, and you see Jonathan, and he's like, oh man, I don't know. I'm like, it's so layered. It's so layered to that point. So, and then of course, there's the whole, he puts the key in the wall, which would be a way for him to do for, since we saw the caves for stuff. So it's this, and it's not, what's crazy, Anthony, it's not premiere. It's not a finale. It's just it's like a February sweeps random episode, right? Episode 17. Like, what are you talking about? So like, there's something refreshing about how this is just a middle of the season episode of Smallville. And it's the most epic, important stuff that ever happens in it occurs in this episode. And it just meant so much having Christopher Reeve be there.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more about that documentary. I was fortunate enough to be able to see it, like yourself, in theaters when Fathom did a couple of days worth of screenings. And yeah, I can't recommend it enough to everybody. I was in tears the entire time.
Oh man, I was too. Like I'm like, it was just so powerful. Such a powerful documentary.
Yeah, and I went by myself because my wife was home with our son, and I was like, I got to see this. And so I carved out some time, and I was able to go, like sitting there by myself in the theater, and a giant bucket of popcorn because I never pass out my popcorn when I go to the theater. I was like crying the entire time. Eating
popcorn.
And I know you did a whole episode about it on your show, which I encourage everyone to check out. I don't anticipate that I will do the same, although, and I guess this is the first time I'm mentioning it on the show, we are going to be covering the 4-film Christopher Reeve series, one movie, one episode at a time. This fall on Digging for Kryptonite, you're going to be joining me for Superman 3. I'm so excited. And I suspect that aspects of the documentary will pop up in that conversation, but it was so moving. Yeah, I mean, his presence in this episode goes such a long way. And of course, the information that Clark learns is pivotal. This is a seminal moment in his journey that he learns his Kryptonian name. He learns that he's from a planet called Krypton, and that Krypton is no longer there. And like you said, this tease about him potentially being a conqueror, huge. But I guess going back to what I was saying about how I chose these episodes, all of that goes a long way. But I think the reason why it fully earns its spot here is that it's such a strong episode, start to finish. Talk about those thematic parallels. You have all of the high school students working on family trees, right? Easy assignment for Pete Ross. He comes from a nuclear family, or at least he does at that point.
For now,
where it'll go in season 3.
Lion aged poorly.
But Chloe, Lana, Clark, they're wrestling with this and their unconventional family situations. And this is really kind of all bringing this home for Clark, hand in hand with this assignment, of course, the fact that he's having these dreams, he's waking up in the middle of the road. The tension between Clark and his parents, they discourage him from putting that key in the wall. Thus far, this has only kind of been a threat, a question mark in terms of his origins and the ship and all of that business. It kind of calls to mind this question of, well, yes, they have arguably valid concerns, but is not part of it maybe that there's an aspect of jealousy or not knowing where this will lead Clark? Will this take their son away from them? Right? So you've got that dynamic at play. And then the Lex side of it. It's like Lex finds Clark in the middle of the road, right? In the middle of the night, finds him again, unconscious in the cave. And then Dr. Walden, right, is unconscious in the cave and Clark is there. It's like really adding a lot of fuel to the fire. Like, this kid knows something about these caves and this language.
Which Dr. Walden keeps trying to tell him. He's like, what is your deal with this kid, Lex? Kid. You're a 17-year-old boy. Well, he's a 16-year-old boy. This is 15. Hell, I don't know.
Yeah.
There are some Lana scenes in this episode. It didn't sink it for me. They're doing Chloe is her sister. Isn't that nice?
Yes.
Isn't that nice?
Oh, and this is where Chloe confesses to Lana that she poured her heart out to Clark, right? In fever, and all he could muster was Lana, right?
It's like Chloe reads. I mean, look, those were extenuating circumstances. But also, isn't this is? And I watched much like I've watched so much Smallville now recently. It's all blurring together. This is when Chloe is. This is when Lana's on Chloe's computer snooping around and finds all the pictures, the WB promotional photos from Tempest on her.
Yes.
On her computer.
Oh man.
Oh, it's good stuff.
For sure. All right. So that is Rosetta. So my number 7, your number 3. Okay. Your number 6, we've already done, which was Tempest.
Mm-hmm.
So my number 6 is season 3, episode 8, Shattered.
Oh, that's my number 5.
Oh, so close.
Look at that.
All right.
Take it away, sir.
I went first last time. You go.
Oh, okay. Well, Shattered, it's, you see, like, this is why I say season 3 might be my favorite season. There's a lot of season 3 representation on my list here, because I feel like that's a season where they had a clear beginning, middle, and end. They had these subplot with Lex and his, his mental stability, right? Because he had a psychotic break when he was younger. They all delve into the history of his younger brother Julian and what happened to him. Because it's been kind of like they kind of tease some stuff, right? And then we really start to find out what really happened this season, and then him finding out that his grandparents had been killed, and perhaps Lionel was the perpetrator. Morgan Edge. Apparently, I'm a big Morgan Edge guy because he's in my top 10 list twice, played by 2 different actors. Rutger Hauer was unavailable for this one, so they got Patrick Bergen. And I must say, this might be the best case where a guy gets plastic surgery. And I'm like, you know what? I kind of think you're the same guy.
Well, not only that, but it's so perfect for this episode, because when Lex is like, Morgan Edge is alive, he's got plastic surgery, it sounds crazy. It's I always make a lot of Office comparisons, but there's this great bit at the end of season 8 when Andy has convinced David Wallace, the former CEO of Dunder Mifflin, to buy the company. And only Andy has interacted with him, and he's trying to convince everyone David Wallace has bought the company. I'm going to be the manager again. And Erin, who's dating Andy, is like, yeah, he's always telling me that he's talking to David Wallace. And everyone's like, but do you ever see him talking to David Wallace? And she's like, no. And then Andy's going on about this, and they're like, Andy, do you see David Wallace right now? It's so funny. And so it reminded me of that, where it's like, yes, I think in terms of the performance and everything, but it's so perfect. Like it perfectly
surgery changes appearance.
I know. It's like, it sounds bonkers. Yeah.
Another line, like these lines that stick out to us. Like, again, Lance and I, best friend, we watch the show together. We start quoting random stuff to each other. Whenever Lex, he goes to the sweatshop, he starts yelling at people. Of course, like, Lex, they don't understand a word you're saying. Like, for whatever reason, that's a line that's stuck in our friend back and forth. All you guys as friends, you know what I'm talking about. You have your lines you quote to each other sometimes. But this episode, a truly tragic downfall for Lex. Like, nobody believes him. The Kents don't like. The Kents make Clark choose between Clark and Lex, and between them and Lex, and Clark goes with Lex. But ultimately, even Clark has to give him up at the end because again. Lex finding out Clark's secret. I am all about. It's all over this list for me now. This is the 3rd time. This car crashes into him. Morgan Edge and Lex have this confrontation, and Lex, he's just shooting Morgan Edge. You're driving a car at this point, so Morgan Edge dies for real. All that plastic surgery for nothing, just to die immediately. It's kind of sad there. But then Clark pushes Lex out of the way because he's going to run over by this car, and then the car crushes him, and Lex sees. He's like, "Oh, I was right about you all along, Clark. You're not even human." Clark has a moment there, and he's thinking, and he just has to super speed away. So ultimately, he has to abandon Lex as well. So the one guy who was with him the whole time and knows that Lex has been drugged, he knows the whole plot against the Lionel and Morgan Edge have orchestrated, and Lex gets taken away. And then he sounds crazy. He's like, "The car, you see it? Look at the car, look at the car." And they're not looking at it. And Lionel, see, the thing is, Lionel in this is he makes so much sense. He's like, well, Lex was a boy, he had a psychotic break, and everyone's like, "Oh, I didn't know that." And so that it makes it so easy. And then also, I love, and again, the very complicated relationship between Lionel and Lex, which is such a backbone of this show. Like the doctor at the end, she's like, "Well, if the treatment goes well, I can monitor his drugs better now that he's in Belle Reve, and he'll have no short-term memory. And Lionel like looks kind of just sad about it. And she's like, I thought this is what you wanted. He's like, never for a second think this is what I wanted. I love my son more than life itself, but he gives me no other choice. Like, it's like, man, what a messed up. These guys are messed up. But, and then of course, it's hard to say what the greatest needle drop of the show is, but one of the greatest is Johnny Cash's cover of 9 Inch Nails' Hurt. What a strange sentence to say, but an incredible ending to this episode with that song and the visuals of Lex in the straitjacket. And you know what, man, like if I don't think anyone got ever nominated for an acting Emmy on this show, but if there ever was one, Rosamund should have been nominated for this episode because he was fantastic as he just got more and more unraveled. He's like, what if I'm right about all this, Clark? And like, it's just, he's playing it so, and like when he breaks into Lionel's office, and he's like, well, we hold a rifle to somebody. They ask them to do something. They tend to do what you ask. It's just, what are we going to Oprah, Dad? Like a normal family. Like, it's just, even in his most like depressing psychotic spiral, like he finds a way to be funny in this villainy. And anyway, this episode is so good. And hey, the mid-season finale of season 3, I think that's when they really started doing that on the show.
Yeah, man. I couldn't agree more with all of that. It's such a tour de force for Rosenbaum. Truly one of his absolute best. And yes, the Johnny Cash cover is amazing. It's iconic. That's again, moments seared into my brain. That's definitely one of them, of Lex in the straitjacket. And the thing with Lionel, and I feel like so much of this is Glover's performance, where it's like in this episode and the next one, I mean, what Lionel does is deplorable. It's despicable. There's no forgiving it. Yet, you still believe him, at least to an extent, that this causes him pain. He doesn't want to do this. And there's also this part of me I keep coming back to, is that he could have just killed Lex. Like Morgan Edge just wanted to kill Lex. Like this was Lionel's way of not killing his son. Right?
Morgan Edge even says Lionel's gone soft at his old age. Yeah.
Yeah. But this episode, and this was so much fun to go back and watch again, where the tension throughout this episode, again, we see Lex experiencing these events, but we don't necessarily know if what we're seeing is just what Lex is perceiving or if it's what's actually happening. He's attacked at the mansion at the beginning. I guess the real tangible hint that we get early on is when Clark goes and he finds that little tiny shard of glass, but it's so minor, and everything else we're seeing, like when they go to the warehouse and it's the sweatshop,
wholly gone. Yeah.
You start to wonder. And again, we've seen Lex have the psychotic break on the island.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. He imagined another person. So it's not without the realm of possibility.
Yeah. And then especially when Lex is holding the blanket, thinking that it's Julie, it's like, there's enough.
Wake the baby.
There's enough. And again, this came up again. This was definitely one that we spent time on when we did our Lex episode, but it's like that reveal when Clark pins down the security guard. And he's like, how'd you do it? And finally the episode breaks where he's like, it was the scotch. Or the booze, whatever he says, like that's how he drugged him. And it's like, like this was done to Lex. He was made to go crazy because you don't know for sure. So it really keeps you guessing. And the fact that Clark goes along as far as he does for his friend, I think speaks volumes. But to your point, at the end, he does abandon Lex. And it, this and Asylum and Memoria, I think really bring up interesting ethical questions for Clark, because on the one hand, there's what's in the best interest of Lex, who has been victimized by his father. Yet at the same time, there is this desire to preserve his secret and the tension that causes. Like it really puts him in a very ethically questionable spot. It's fascinating, man. It's so good. It's so good. And there is a little bit of Lana here. Clearly this wasn't enough to destroy the episode for you. I mean, to me, this is one of those things where it's like, all right, like you want to be part of Clark's world. Not that she gets what she deserves. I don't want to put it that way, but it's like, it's interesting. It's like, okay, this is an instance where he brings her in, right? And it ends up going horribly awry. She's trampled by this horse and breaks her leg. So,
yeah. No, this is an episode where like, I feel like all the characters really had a part to play, and it just all really came together. And because you're always like, what is gonna happen between Clark and Lex? Like, and then you're in a world where it's season 3 and the show probably thinks it's gonna go 5. Like, we should probably start, doing this. And you think like all these mental shenanigans with Lex is gonna, it's not going to be an excuse why he's a villain in the future, but it's certainly not good for his mental health. And that can warp his mind to make choices and go down a darker path, of which he has tendencies to do so. And I got to go back to that scene again. There's so many great scenes in this episode, but the scene with Lionel in Lionel's office when Lex breaks in there, and he's like, "You killed your parents." It's like, "No, Lex, no, I would never harm my parents, regardless of how badly they may have treated me. You never harm your parents." It's Lex is holding a gun out of him. All these little things, right? And it's fantastic. And again, like, this is a reason why season 3, I'm like, could it be the best season? It might be. It might be for episodes like this, because it's not only a great individual episode, but like you already said, it ties into the premiere with Lex's psychotic break. It ties into later episodes and this whole plot line of Lex trying to get his memories back. So just fantastic stuff. And I'm happy to see it be on both our lists. I'm not surprised.
For sure. I mean, I don't want to ask you to spoil, but we're talking Shattered. Is Asylum on your list?
No.
It's not on mine either, though it is one of my honorable mentions. And I
thought about it.
Like, Shattered is the stronger of the two, but at the same time, I feel like, for me at least, I feel like Asylum sometimes goes a little overlooked because of how strong Shattered is. But Asylum is great. And again, that ethical question for Clark is really on the forefront in that episode. He
does his best, though. He does his best. And like, I think I mentioned in our Clark's Journey episode, like when they pull that switch for the electrical thought therapy, I was like, no, because like Clark said, because even then Lex was going to stop. He was going to stop the guy. He's like, leave Clark alone. Like, and all that's like, he was still his loyal friend. And I don't know, like it is powerful stuff, but it's like when you got to make choices, it's like, well, Adam Knight's in that episode. So
yeah, I know. You mean Bruce Wayne? You know what? Let me just say real quick, because we didn't, even when we talked about the heroes of the DCU, we talked about the show not using Batman. We didn't talk about Adam Knight. I know fans always speculated that was where they were going to go with that character. Our mutual friend, Craig Byrne from Krypton Site, he has since confirmed the original plan for Adam Knight was he was going to be a younger clone of Lionel. That was the original intention, not Batman. But obviously they abandoned that as well.
Thank you. Like, that doesn't make any, like, what? Like, I wasn't thrilled about what they did with him, but that was better than, in my opinion, what that would have been. So
yeah. All right. So Shattered, that was my number 6 and your number 5. So that takes me to my number 5, which is season 4, episode 6, Transference.
This is on my honorable mentions. It was so close. It was, Anthony, I could not put 2 season 4 episodes on my top 10 list.
It's season 4 historically, and I guess not unlike yourself, has been one of the lesser seasons in my eyes. Yet it has, again, 2 spots on my list here. And I have to say, upon rewatch, and I said this when we talked previously, I've come to appreciate it more, because it's like the show does get so dark in the seasons ahead. And I kind of found, in retrospect, like going back to these episodes, like, they were fun. They were light. Clark's playing football. Even episodes like Devoted with the Kryptonite Gatorade, or Spirit with the prom queen. It's like, they were amusing, and I had fun with them. But it's funny you say that, though. I know I gasped, but it almost didn't make my list. And in fact, when I first started sketching this out, I hadn't yet rewatched Transference. I was saving this for the end. You know, I've been rewatching a ton, but that was one I was like, I'll circle back to that at the end. And as I was making this list, I said to myself, like, is it really that good? Like, a lot of fans will cite this. We know Welling, and like they talked about that a lot at conventions and on Talkville and everything. I was like, is it really that good? And I rewatched it last night, and I was like, for me, I was like, yeah, it really was. It was so good. This, of course, is the famous body swap episode where Lionel uses one of the stones of power. He initially intends to switch bodies with Lex, but Clark intervenes, and we get a Lionel-Clark body swap. So Clark is stuck in Lionel's diseased body that only has a month to live in prison, and Lionel is in Clark's body with all of his powers and the world theoretically at his feet here. And I guess there's so much to love about this episode. It's such a standout performance from Welling channeling John Glover. It's so fascinating to watch. But I think big picture, what I love the most about this episode is that it was able to walk a very fine line between being so humorous. There's so many fun and funny moments throughout the episode, yet the stakes are always high, as opposed to something like, again, Devoted or Spirit. I do look at those as more fun, humorous episodes. Stakes not super high in that one, right? I'm only so invested. No. But this, again, I feel like this was this rare combination of really fun, yet very high deadly stakes, for Clark and our other characters. So, man, I love this one so much.
Man, and there's a version of my list where it's on here. I kind of think to me, I was like, well, it's either going to be Onyx or Transference. So, but we've seen Evil Clark. I mean, this is Tom Welling's best performance of the show. I truly believe that. And him channeling John Glover is just so good. If I had to like reasons why it's not on my list, it's like the resolution at the end. Lionel's like, yeah, I feel I'm healed now, and I feel like something good's in me, and we'll see. Like, how can Clark remember what happened to him in Lionel's body, but Lionel doesn't remember what happened to him in Clark's body? I don't like that. They should have both not remembered anything. Because the whole thing, Stone of Power thing was in there, and he had to remember the guy, and I don't know, like Jason and Lana are part of this. Of course, Lionel makes it very funny, right? And be like, oh, of course, you have urges. You're young. You have needs. I understand. Like,
I'm not surprised he would cross continents to pluck your succulent fruit. Yeah.
Amazing stuff. I know who you are. You're my coach. Like, so many one-liners. The way he like plays Chloe, because he's in a unique spot to know what Chloe, like what to do to kind of put her in the worst position ever. And of course, Martha. We talked about Lionel and Martha. Like, I need a hug. Like the heat vision. It's fantastic. Like I'm talking to myself. I'm like, man, maybe it should have been in my top 10. But I guess part of me was like, I cannot put 2 season 4 episodes in my top 10 list, Anthony.
No, I understand. And again, Onyx, that was definitely in the mix, and maybe that's part of why that one didn't make it on the list and this one did. But again, the performance, this combination, and then just seeing Clark's world through Lionel's eyes, right, and how he's taking in everything was really fascinating. Checking out his body in the mirror, and the Martha business, the heat vision. I mean, like it draws upon our collective knowledge and familiarity with the show and all of these tropes. And like it has so much fun with it. And yeah, I don't know, man. It was just a blast. It's funny because we talked a lot about the stones, like this overall mythology arc for season 4 and how lackluster it was. And I look at an episode like this, to me, I think is the best representation of the stones, or best.
No question.
And I'm saying to myself, why the hell didn't they do more like this? There could have been more stones, and they could have just been engines.
Oh,
I mean, maybe it would have gotten too gimmicky, but I don't know if there was a time stone and it trapped you in a time loop and you're reliving the same day over and over, Groundhog Day sort of thing.
Fantastic. I love that. I'm disappointed I haven't thought of that idea before, Anthony. That's fantastic, because he gets the first stone, he puts it in the cave the whole time, and the other stone, like, they don't get to the last episode.
Yeah, no, I'm saying like that's what they should have done. And all of this business about the Kryptonians walking the earth, and they were meant for Clark, but they're guarded by kryptonite that somehow exists before the planet's destroyed. None of this makes any sense. But if you just kind of use them for stuff like this, it could have been a fantastic vehicle for storytelling. So, and I love too that Lex realizes that it's Lionel in Clark's body.
Yeah, very quickly. Yeah.
And at the end of the episode, when Clark shows up and Lex tests him, and he's like, he refers to that moment on the bridge, and he's like, your father said something to do. We always joke about. What was it? What can I do? And, Clark says, drive slower. The thing that I love about that, call back to the pilot, but also it's like, when the hell do they joke with each other? Like, when are these times when they're just sitting around joking?
Well, I love that, because it's like when they're playing pool or whatever, like, again, I'm mentioning all these lines that me and Lance say to each other from Smallville as jokes. Like, I love that Clark and Lex have lines or things that they've experienced that they joke about, because we all have it. We all have quotes from things that we all kind of share. I love the fact that that kind of adds an extra layer to their friendship, which makes me happy. They're like, what do we always joke about?
I know. I just wish we could have seen them joke sometime. That's all. But nice. I know it adds a little lived in feel to it. And then talk about needle drops. Jimmy Eat World pain during the prison riot.
Pain away.
Oh my God, so good. And that prison riot. I mean, it's like,
that's, again, the show had a budget.
They had budget. I mean,
I know I keep saying that.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, the amount of inmates who were mixing it up in there was really something.
And a couple of, I know I'm talking a lot about episodes on my list, but this is the one that I was like, I felt really bad that it wasn't there, but so I had so many strong thoughts about it. But like the way that Clark like outmaneuvers Lionel, like in each other's bodies, where he like hides the crystal under his arm and then catches it, and because he tries to do the switch earlier, and Lionel uses the X-ray vision, which I don't know how you found out about that or figured that out, but that's fine. I do love when he says, "You, like me, understand the true power is best left concealed.
Yes.
Like, so he understands and respects like the fact that, you know, he can do that. It's kind of like, well, like what Lex says in Onyx, like, I gotta hand it to you guys. Maybe the Kinston Luthers aren't so different after all. And John Glover is the best actor on the show by far. But he plays Clark like he's 10, not he's you're a 17-year-old boy, not a 10-year-old boy. It's like I was lost in the woods, and you told me I was a very special boy, and I ran. I was like, John. Now, John Glover himself has said it's very difficult to play Clark. He's like, there's nothing to play here. You're just like good all the time. I don't understand. But you still, despite that disconnect, like as good as Thomas and playing John Glover, like I don't know what is there. Again, John Glover said, "What is there to play when you're Clark?" I don't know. I don't know. But you come to love this little underdog Clark in John Glover's body throughout the episode. So by the time they switch, you're like, oh, because man, I get Tom Welling so good at playing the villain. Like, damn, this guy is badass evil villain. Like he's gonna kill this guy and choke it. It's like Martha can't save you now when he's choking Jonathan at the house. And anyway. Despite my comments on his performance, John Glover as Clark, again, you do grow attached to this guy throughout the course of the episode. So, and hey, we talked about Chris Reeve. Margot Kidder's in this episode.
Yeah.
Margot Kidder representation. She got a scene in a limo, and that was the end of Bridget Crosby, at least on camera.
I know, but killed off camera and just see her feet in the dirt later on. But no, I agree. Like, it's funny because I know you've talked about Glover playing Clark like he's 10. So I had that in my head as I was rewatching. I guess I'm a little more generous to the performance, but I do get what you're saying. Clearly he was trying to lean into that innocence and probably overshot the mark
too.
Yeah,
like, oh, mom, you know.
But the fact that, and this is not the first instance. I mean, this is the most extreme instance where Clark is literally in another body, but we've had him powerless before, and that heroic core remains. And not only is he still fighting for himself, he's trying to help Edgar, the inmate who has all this information about the stones. It is funny when we talk about Lionel in Clark's bodies mastering the powers. Again, the heat vision gets set off inadvertently through the hormones when he's hugging Martha, and right before that he utilizes his super speed inadvertently. But it's an instance, and we see this so many time and time again on the show, where when other people have Clark's powers, they seem to master them a lot faster than Clark does, which is a little bit frustrating, but at the same time, I get the efficiency of storytelling. It's like they can't go through this every time. He's
a 17-year-old boy.
True.
As we know.
It is true. But no,
at least he wasn't flying. At least he didn't fly.
But my hands down. So I guess, well, it's hard to single out. I'm not just going to say these are my only favorite moments, but you mentioned the moment with Chloe where he leans in and then he's like, don't you wish?
Don't you wish?
Oh man, just twisting that knife. But even more so than that, when Lana walks into the barn and he rolls his eyes and he's like, this one again.
This one.
Amazing.
He lives the internet in 2004. Yeah.
This one. And it's great because like she's going on and on pleading with like, don't tell anyone about Jason and this and that. And
he does not care.
I know.
I believe that's Lionel and Lana's first scene together on the show, by the way. I can't think of any time they interacted.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Yeah. And then with Jason too, where he's like, I have no interest in football. And it's like, clearly he doesn't. And it's so good, man. Like this was a fun one. So that was my number 5. What is your number 4?
My number 4 is season 10, episode 4, Homecoming.
That is my number 2. That
used to be my number 2. And then we'll talk about it as we go. But it's a fantastic episode. One of the best. This is, of course, you've been doing these nice summaries. I'm sorry, I don't think I have for the episode.
All good.
So for the listeners at home, this is the 200th episode of the show. Clark and Lois go to their 5-year high school reunion at SMALLVILLE High School. As we all know, you have 5-year reunions in high school. Brainiac 5 shows up from the future, takes Clark on this Christmas Carol-esque journey through his past, present, and future, and helps him kind of overcome this darkness, or at least try to overcome this darkness that he has in his heart in season 10, and come to terms with the death of Jonathan, which has kind of caused this. And then he sees a glimpse of himself in the future, meets his future self briefly, and sees how his life is going to turn out, and kind of restores that hope. And of course ends in this beautiful moment where Clark and Lois tell each other they love each other, and they start floating because subconsciously Clark can overcome this mental block he has to fly when he's with Lois. So just a fantastic kind of walk down memory lane. We revisit Reckoning, the 100th episode. We revisit the present where Oliver Queen has decided to tell the world he's the Green Arrow. One of my favorite lines is Clark telling Brainiac, "I don't see how not returning his calls has some kind of darkness in my in my heart." And, James Marsters returns as Brainiac, who's one of the most memorable and best supporting villains, and then just characters here. He's not a. There's a double switch where you think like, is he a villain in this episode? And then he's not. So that's a cute double switch there. And then Clark gets thrown into the future, and we see Superman saves the day. Newspapers. We see Lois keep trying to put glass. I love the little hand sign she has. She just this double like circles around her eyes when Clark says like, she's basically like, "Hey, glasses, hello." Some people come down from like a different floor. Like, I told you it's not him. It's the guy from the 8th floor. When they see Clark in the future from the Daily Planet. I guess he loses in some kind of time paradox. He must lose his letter jacket there because he leaves into that office. I love the little moment when they go into Clark Kent, Lois Lane's offices. His name is first. He has a little smile. She's like, they're changing that. So anyway, this is a great celebration of the show. Obviously a lot to do with the Clark and Lois relationship, which, we haven't really talked about in these. I don't know what that says about the show, but I'm just saying in our top 10 episodes, we haven't really got a lot of that play in our top 10. But this is a great celebration of that, focus on that, because who is, and you're rewatching Reckoning and then rewatching Homecoming, the part of me is like, I don't know, like Reckoning, they had all the pieces there still. And here they had to work with what they had, right? Like there was no Lex anymore. Like how do you have a 200th episode without Lex? I think eventually my dilemma was, I think it's dropped a little bit because you've heard me talk about how important the Luthers are, right? And I'm like, how, like they did a fantastic job. It was a great level lever to the show. I think in a different, if things went a little differently, you could repurpose this in some sort of series finale, but very fulfilling, right? But like to have the Luther element be such a missing piece. Now we see stock footage of Lionel, and him and Jonathan's final confrontation. But outside of that, like, I mean, Jonathan even says, kids and Luthers, we have each other and you don't. That's the difference. That's great. That's a theme of the show. But a little bit of something was missing, which is, again, it's my number 4. So I'm not saying, but there's a reason why it's like not like number 2 or something like it maybe used to be. So those are my scattershot thoughts here off the top.
Fair. I mean, I'll be honest. Well, I guess this wouldn't have worked for the present, but I would have sacrificed the Oliver piece for something Luther related. Right. Again, I don't know how that would have worked in the context of this, right, of this Christmas Carol framework. But yes, I agree. The Luthers were missed here. But no, man, I love this episode. Not only did I rewatch this before you and I did our earlier episodes, but I rewatched it again last night because I just kind of wanted it fresh once more. And I agree with everything you said. I mean, one of the things I noticed in putting this list together, and it's holding true for your list as well so far, our list is real kind of front loaded with episodes from the first half of the series for the most. I mean, so far you have Justice in there but even then that's season 6. So most of what's on our list so far, and I know there might be an exception to that for you coming up, but most of what's on our list so far has been from the earlier part of the series. But when I look at the back half, and especially that final era, the Metropolis era of the show, this is far and away the standout. And one of the things I love about it is how it bridges all eras of the show together, because we see these moments from early on. We see this moment where the darkness set in when Clark started blaming himself after Jonathan's death, and then how he's eventually able to move past it. I got to tell you, man, so I had kind of like a personal epiphany when I was watching this again last night, and hopefully I can articulate this and not tear up either. But the scene where Brainiac 5 takes Clark to the night of Jonathan's death in the barn, when they're watching the fight between Lionel and Jonathan. And Brainiac says, "You can't change his fate, Kal-El." And Clark goes, "He was just protecting me." And Brainiac says, "And that was his choice. Whether it happens this day or any other day, Jonathan set his own destiny into motion." And Clark says, "He didn't have a choice. He's my father. Of course he'd do anything to protect me." And honestly, man, I think even as recently as the last time I watched this for our previous conversation, I think I've always kind of got stuck on those words. That's kind of what I've always kind of glommed onto, because I think that's how I've always felt about fatherhood. It's like from the moment I met my son, it's like something instinctively, it's like, no, this is it. Like I have to give you my everything. But rewatching it again, man, this was very moving to me. When Brainiac says, "We always have a choice. Your father didn't have to care for you the way he did, yet he still made that choice every day he was with you. He chose to be your protector, just as you've chosen to be the Earth's protector." I don't want to make this sound like so self-serving, like I'm patting myself on the back, but I sort of had this moment of, it's like, yeah, I choose to be the kind of father that I am to my son. Like, that is a choice that I make.
Yeah.
And, you know, there are instances that we see or we have experienced where fathers or parents generally don't make that choice. And oh my God, we see it on the show with Lionel in that exact moment. So I think, because when you and I talked about it, I was still kind of hung up on all the layers of guilt that the show kind of put on Clark, like the fact that Jonathan had the heart condition because he took the powers to bring Clark back, and then someone had to die because Clark was resurrected, and then Clark undid time. But I think, I think I had the same realization now that Clark did, and I think it took until this viewing, my, I don't know, 5th, 6th time watching this episode, where it's like, yeah, it was this choice that Jonathan made. And we've seen over the course of the show his temper get the better of him many times. And to Brainiac's point, whether it was that night fighting Lionel in the barn when Lionel showed this evidence of Clark's secret, or any other time, eventually this was going to happen because he chose to be that kind of protector for Clark. It wasn't something he had to do. It's something he chose to do. And Clark realized that, and I finally realized that. It was very, very moving to me. I've been thinking about it all day.
No, it's something that Clark obviously just took for granted in a way, because he's like, well, of course he was going to do that, right? And I'm like, you know what? Don't take it for granted, right? I mean, we have plenty of examples in this world, unfortunately, where fathers don't do that for their sons. So Clark had a great father, and this episode kind of, it as we talked about before, like you said, it put things in perspective for him about all that, and so he's able to move past that and bury the watch at the grave, and this is one of those episodes where it's like, it's important. It's also fantastic, and it has a lot to say. Like, there's no big battles or anything unless he saves the helicopter, which is a classic Superman thing. And, they don't have the budget now, as we've been saying, season 10, so they don't have the budget really. So, but it's not about that, right? It's about the message it says, and it's a good, powerful message. And then it does, like you said, it does bridge the gap, bridge all those errors, because we get Bug Boy, he comes back and he represents all the freaks of the week, and all the fans are kind of represented in the different students at the high school, and there's something powerful about revisiting, because the show hadn't been there in 5 years, right? I mean, they graduated from high school, they don't go back to the high school, right? In seasons 5 onward, and having those little flashbacks of Chloe and Lana, even though they weren't there, like the actors or the characters, but they're weaved in there very nicely. So it's a great celebration. It was the best of what season 10 was trying to do, which was look back and celebrate everything that had come before.
Yeah, well said. I know those little flashes. What are you, Clark, man or Superman? It's like they fit in perfectly. And that future sequence, because I know when we talked about Homecoming before, mostly we focused on the overcoming the guilt over Jonathan's death, but that future sequence, just to see this life that he'll have with Lois, and to see him taking all of this in, of like, she's like, you're protecting my secret, right? Just to know that he has this partner who accepts him, who helps him. The chemistry between them, like you said, the motion about putting on the glasses,
it's adorable.
When they kiss on the rooftop, and she's like, "You drive me crazy." It's like you feel that electricity between them, and of course the scene between Clark and his future self in the elevator. When did I get so uptight and nerdy? Which I wonder too. What do you make of that future personality, especially behind closed doors when it's just him and his past self?
Well, I mean, it's the appearance more than what he's saying.
Time travel.
Well done, my man.
Yeah, well done, my man. Think it through. We've been through weirder things.
Yeah. I mean, and as much as I love the Christopher Reeve version of Clark Kent, this Clark Kent didn't need to be that, but then the show decided it did, and this was early season 10, so they hadn't quite, because later in season 10, Lois helps them turn into that, and like before, they hadn't really figured it out yet, and it doesn't matter. But it's I think the important thing was he was trying to show him who he would be, right?
Yeah.
So I better like, hey, look, bro, you got to be like this in the future. And so instead of him just taking the glasses off, as Tom Welling is so prone to do every other time we see him on the show, taking them off for every opportunity. I would have liked to see a shirt rip. That would be cool, right? He just super speeds out of that. I mean, season 1 Clark could have done that.
True.
He just super speeds all of another. Now we see the cape and we see the yellow S on the back and the CGI and that's as much as we get in the finale. So, it's fine. I guess. But no, I really, the helicopter thing is important though. Helicopter thing is a tradition in Superman media. Superman the movie many other versions, he's saving helicopters or planes and stuff. So I think that was a really cool, because they had to be like, what can we do here? Right. And that's a great Superman thing to do for him to do. And he can't be in two places at once. Superman the movie, again, think about it.
Yeah.
So playing a lot of homages to that. You know what? Speaking of, real quick, because we see Reckoning in Homecoming, Chloe makes a cute reference to the time travel, Superman the movie, and that. So that kind of triggered that thought. What is Lionel's deal in Reckoning? Like, what's like, dude, like, you're like good Lionel now, but then you're still like he doesn't know how to be a good guy, I guess, and fires up Jonathan, and that just like is the straw that broke the camel's back with him.
I was going to bring this up before, but then I was like, I won't keep it. I'm glad. Well,
since we saw the stock footage, just now's our time.
I mean, like, I've not really been able to sort this out over the years, or even upon rewatch, and it is as much as I've made my peace with what Jonathan chooses to do in protecting Clark, there is a part of me that's like, but was this really unwarranted? Because we are at the era of Lionel where I don't think his intentions were nefarious. I think it appeared that way. I mean, my God, in a few episodes, in the Cyborg episode, Martha gets blackmailed, right? And he intervenes, and then he's watching the footage of Clark using his powers, and he's like, your secret is safe, Kal-El. So it's like, I don't think he was actually threatening Jonathan in that moment. I think that's how Jonathan took it. And I think the idea of Jonathan suffering a fatal heart attack fighting Lionel to protect Clark is so compelling. Of course, you know, but I guess I kind of wish Lionel's intentions had been nefarious. There's a part of me that feels like, oh, maybe if you had just talked to him, like it would have been all right.
Yeah. He's like, so what do you mean by this? But look, it was the coming to the head of his years hating this guy. Ever since the adoption, or ever since he convinces the Rosses to sell the cream corn factory, he's hated this guy, and he's trying to move in on his wife, and you know, it's like he doesn't. So any excuse to beat this guy up, he was like, I'm gonna pay you all that money back anyway. Like you were saying about the machinations of how we got to where Jonathan died from a heart attack. Like there's a lot of convoluted stuff there, but we get down to the core of it. You know, it all worked. But I wanted to bring that up, especially since we revisited the scene again.
Yeah. No, and then
hey, that says a lot though. We got the 100th and the 200th episode on the top 10.
I know. And when Clark in Homecoming, when he sees his future self speed off, he's like, that's what I become. It's one of those things.
A total loser.
We talked about this when we covered Legion and all of that, and the Justice Society episode with Dr. Fate, and your fate is utterly blinding and all of that. It's a fine line, because you want the character to take these steps, and are we short circuiting the process when he's getting these glimpses or being told these things? But I think this is a point Clark needed it. And there's something just like we talked about in the finale where Clark sees all of his trials, like what a gift to be shown at all that you've done. And similarly here, it's a gift that I think Clark needs at a critical juncture to kind of see like, hey, it works out. You can have this life. You can have Lois side by side with you. And then, like you said, to get that final scene between them in the barn. And I know we haven't had a lot of Lois and Clark talk in this episode, but God, it's such a perfect scene where, you know, he's like, I'm sorry, I missed our dance. And she's like, if anybody understands, it's me. You don't have to worry about me. And he's like, I'm not worried. I just missed you. It's like, what a far cry from all of the fraught longing with Lana. It's like, no,
trying to protect you.
Like he just wants her. Like he wants to be with her. It's great.
Well, and then she's like, hey, we need to talk. He's like, let's just have this dance.
Because a hero is made in the moment, as he learns.
That's right.
And he'll say it to Booster in that episode. A hero is made in the moment. He learns his lesson. Oh God. Homecoming. So good.
Fantastic.
I also do like, because everything by Lifehouse starts to play, and then it gets cut off, right? Or it's the end of the song, just as they're starting to dance. I'm glad that they have Lois and Clark have their own song, right?
Yeah, well, whatever song that is, not near as iconic, but sure.
Yeah, well, but it worked, because it's like I always associate everything with Clark and Lana, that imaginary dance that Clark has in his mind at the end of the pilot.
Well, I associate it with Whitney. As established in Tempest.
That creepy old man. All right, so. Okay, so that was where are we? All right, so that was your number 4, which was my number 2. My number 4. My number 4 is season 3, episode 19, Memoria.
That is my number 2.
That's your number 2. Okay.
We've had 2 flips.
Yes,
right.
Our lists are so they other than those first few where we really diverged.
You thought for sure like, oh, it's going to be a lot of nope.
So
anyway, take it away.
This, I feel like, such a great payoff companion piece to Shattered, where now you have Lex undergoing all of these experiments at the Summerholt Institute to recover those memories, those weeks that were erased.
I want those
by
7
Lionel
weeks back
through the electroshock therapy. And of course, what he unearths are not the memories of those 7 weeks, but these early childhood memories that he had repressed. We see a scene between Lex and Lionel when no one shows up for Lex's birthday party, and you see probably the warmest side of Lionel towards Lex that we'll see in the show, where he actually it gives him the gift with the box. You could put all of your fears and doubts in there. Like it's a shockingly warm moment, right?
Because this is like peak evil Lionel. So like he's never been eviler than now. But then you're like, wow, what's this about? What changed between Lex and Lionel? And then we sure as hell find out, don't we?
Yeah, we find out when Lex finally uncovers this repressed memory that it was actually his mother, Lillian, who had killed baby Julian, not Lex, as Lex and Lionel had believed all of these years, but rather Lex saw his mother standing over the crib and took the fall for her because he knew that as Lionel's sole remaining heir, Lionel would protect Lex as opposed to Lillian, who would be the lamb to the slaughter. And when they finally have this confrontation, Lex and Lionel in the present day, it is one of the most heartbreaking, tragic scenes of the entire show. I said the lines when we did our Lex episode. You do the honors for this one.
Yeah, he's like, Lex, if I know that things would be so different between us, and it just the way that John Glover is like quivering and all that, like it's just one of his fantastic performances. And he's like, and Lex pulls him. He's like, no, like he's gonna say I love you, but Lex is like, no, you don't get to say that. Basically, and he walks off and leaves him there, just kind of staggering, just like because. What 15 years or something this has been, and he's hated his son, and like, did you need this extra layer underneath the complicated relationship between Lex and Lionel? No, but it's so intriguing. It makes he's not just some asshole dad for the sake of it. Like this, he thinks his son killed his other son.
Yeah, I'm glad we got this layer because look, the first season, I maybe there's a lot you can chalk up to. Well, it's a tough love approach to parenting, and he's trying to prepare his son. And
he's a little two-dimensional, maybe. And that's in the first. I mean, he's very effective, and he plays the role he needs to play. But there's not as much nuance there as we would like and find later.
Fair. And then by the time you get to season 3, like peak Lionel villainy, there he's trying to preserve his freedom because Lex is trying to take him down over this business about killing Lionel's parents. And of course, we know he's trying to find power
for that liver disease.
Right, to cure this disease of his. So he's fighting for his life and his freedom. And so, there's a lot you can attribute to that, and that would probably be enough. But I do love that it's like, no, there was something deeper between them over all of these years. And it's like, that in and of itself would probably earn this episode the spot on the list. But it's also, we get some interesting Lionel Clark scenes here.
Yeah.
Right. And it's, again, this idea of this ethical question for Clark, because ostensibly Lex should recover what was taken from him, these memories that he lost, yet it's going to put him in Lionel's crosshairs. But even more personally for Clark, it could,
he's gonna remember his secret.
Yeah, he could remember the secret. So you have that aspect that Clark is wrestling with there. And of course, Lionel manipulates Clark into a situation that ultimately allows them to get Clark into this contraption, the kryptonite bath. And that's when he has this first memory of being placed in the rocket by Jor-El and Lara. Yeah.
Lara. Well, and then the continuity here, this is the doctor who was experimenting on Ryan in season 2. We meet him again earlier this season. He was doing mind control. So like, this is Summerhold Institute, this deep Smallville. I love it when we go deep into like Smallville specific mythology like that. Like this is a Smallville specific thing. And like Lionel plays the tape from Asylum. Like, I know your secret. I haven't told anyone. He's like, I think it's you who don't want him to recover his memories. And like Clark, he went so like gung ho in there. And then like, I would love to see, I know the scene cuts away because what do you even respond to it? But like, I would love to see Clark try and be like, what does he do? Just leave? How do you respond to that? Right. Because again, Asylum, fantastic episode, that kind of that desperate moment. He's like, why did it take you so long to give me this? Because like Lionel like he erases Lex's mind and then finds out that Lex knew Clark's secret. And it's that almost is like, karma on him, for doing that to his son. Like all the answers you needed, he had, and you're responsible for those being taken away from you. So anyway, that moment coming back in this episode was fantastic. And then Miles Millar, like written and directed by Miles Millar, Memoria was. So what a singular vision of like, and it shows, and that's why it's so high on my list. And that's why it's actually moved up because like, again, like the Luthers are so essential to the show. And I was looking at my list and I'm like, I need to have them. I need to have a Luther representation on the top 2 episodes. So that's why this one's just moved up on my list. And this, I mean, to me, and I think that's always why I like when Covenant came out as the season finale, my estimation on that episode has raised. At the time I was like, okay, that was good. But like Memoria was like perfection. Like,
yeah. Well, and I think it's as perfect as you can get for a Luther episode. But the fact that you also have Clark's dilemma, but then also that memory about Lara and that scene, and we talked about it previously, between Clark and Martha in the barn, set to My Immortal by Evanescence.
Amazing needle drop, A+.
Yeah. And this whole idea of, I can't believe I forgot my mother's name. And Martha's like, you didn't. Your first word was Lara. We could never figure out what it was. And this whole idea about, I wish she could have seen, I ended up with you guys as my parents. And Martha's like, she did. A mother's love never dies. It's so moving. So you have this critical Clark piece. And like we said, he's only dealt with this disembodied voice of Jor-El telling him to rule with strength. And so now he sees this other side, this mother who just was worried about whether or not he'd be loved. So you have the whole Clark piece of it too. I laid this out when we did our Lex episode. My theory about Lex and his psychology. I think Lex performed one truly good, pure, selfless act in his life, and it was protecting his mother by taking the blame. I think after that, it's not that he never did good things, but I think it was always more about trying to be good, trying to be seen as good, trying to be loved. But I think that moment protecting Lillian, I think that was the one truly good, pure thing he did.
Yeah. All ulterior motives, or at least, like you said, like, well, I think this is what good people are supposed to do, and I want to be a good person, so I guess I'll do this. But and this is the first time we see Lillian. We've heard her talked about for after her mother died, before her mother died, right? For so many times, and this is the first time we see her, and interesting too, like you kind of mythologized her, and through Lex's commentary, like, oh, I had this evil dad and this perfect mom, and then you see what was really up, and you're like, well, I don't know, man. Like, Lionel wasn't the best dude, I guess, but he seemed to be kind of supportive of Lex there. And then his mom literally killed his brother. So maybe things are not as black and white, which is the whole story of that family to begin with.
Yeah. And then when Lex is revealing all of this to Lionel, and Lionel's like, essentially, don't blame your mother, something to that effect. And Lex is like, I don't blame her. I blame you. He's like, what?
It's like, fine, Lex, how am I responsible for your mother's death? And the whole, could that be the best scene between Lex and Lionel, between John Glover and Michael Rosenbaum?
Yes.
In the show, it might be.
I think that is. I think that is. Descent is up there, where, of course, Lex finally killed. But no, I think this, and it's so, look, again, as much as we love all the mythology and all that, but like this is just like twisted, messed up family history dynamics, dark secrets. I mean, this, oh my God, it was so good. And I, like you said, this line about, things would have been different. Yeah, you might have actually loved me.
Yep.
One of the episodes I rewatched over the course of all of this was Fracture, where Clark goes into Lex's mind and all that. But at the end of that episode, Lionel, and this is Lionel when he's an ally of Clark at this point, and then the show's run, more or less. And he tells Lex that he loves him. And I think it's as genuine as Lionel can be when he says it. And this is a Lex at this point in his journey. He just walks away, walks right past him. Right. Past the point where that's something he could receive or reciprocate. So again, so tragic, but man, such a standout episode, Memoria. So that's my number 4, your number 2.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, well, your number 3 was Rosetta.
Mm-hmm.
My number 3 was Reckoning.
Okay.
We moved down. Your number 2, Memoria. My number 2 was Homecoming.
Okay.
So we're down to our number 1.
Well, this is it.
This is it. We're going to have different ones here, and I think we're going to surprise each other. So your number 1.
My number 1, season 9, episode 21 and or 22, depending on how you label season 9, Salvation.
Okay, go for it.
All right. Salvation is the season 9 finale. Everything comes to a head between Clark and the Kandorians. General Zod has powers now. The clones for an orb. It's a whole thing. Check it out. It's a great season.
The Book of Rao.
The Book of Rao the Martha the Red Queen has acquired the Book of Rao for Clark and is going to send all the Kryptonians away. So Clark and the Justice League, who he talks to every single member for the most part over a Zoom call, they're all represented here, and they can either fight the Kandorians or he can send them all away to the Book of Rao. The problem is it sends all Kryptonians away, so Clark would also have to leave. So he has to entrust the Earth to the rest of them. Also, him and Lois's relationship has kind of come to a head. Zod has been acting like he's the Blur. There's been this whole subplot of Lois, hasn't seen the Blur's face. They've been talking, and Zod uses that against Clark and impersonates the Blur. So he gets Lois to do some, investigating for him, stealing the book around, all these things. All that comes to a head. It's all revealed in the climax where, Zod's pretty much he's got what he needed from Lois, so he's going to dispose of her. But Clark saves her, kisses her in a dark alley. She realizes that Clark is the Blur. And it's like, oh, Clark, right? Because the whole Spider-Man, Mary Jane thing with the kiss, she realizes that Clark and the Blur are one and the same. Then he's going to activate the Book of Ra. An amazing moment. Oh, he actually, he turns all Zod's people against each other because it reveals that Zod killed the mother of his own born son. And through the super hearings, again, Clark outmaneuvering the villains as he often does, often with Zod as well. And then they have this incredible fight without powers because, they activate the Book of Ra. All the Kandorians get sucked up, but Zod pulls out a blue kryptonite knife, and that makes Clark and Zod human. They have this incredible fight in the rain, and Clark ultimately sacrifices himself, or thinks he is going to sacrifice himself, by letting Zod stab him, falling back off the roof, and Zod gets sucked into New Krypton, wherever that may be. And the season ends with an incredible cliffhanger where you're like, what's going to happen? I don't know. Right. And to me, the best cliffhangers are not like, oh, who's going to live or die? It's like, what could happen? What does it mean? And Tempest before, that's the other season finale I have on here. Salvation Now. Also, we have the tease of the potentially parademons coming to get Green Arrow. They weren't.
They're not Kandorians. It's like, oh my God, they're parademons. No, they're not.
You see Granny Goodness. And then the next scene, you see all these things flying around Green Arrow. Apparently it was a Suicide Squad. That was a cheat, but whatever. It's fine. It's not that episode's problem. Again, they had no budget for parademons. So I'm just summarizing it now, right? But my point, to me, this is like, this could be the series finale of the show. They tweak some things because Clark says himself in the show, I know my destiny. Right? The episode opens up with this flash forward to the far future of 2013. Anthony, you remember that 2013 far future? It's the Daily Planet. Lois Lane is there. She's reading a newspaper article about Lex running for president. I'm like, all right, they fixed that. Between now and then, they're going to take care of that. Olsen, get your camera, right? So we see a Superman cape. He saves a plane. Clark opens up the box that Martha made him a suit. He opens it up. Superman's costumes. Like, it's all right there. This could be Superman year one right now. But then he has to navigate this relationship with Lois. He's going to stay. He's going to go. He's going to tell her goodbye. And I don't know, like, I thought this was just a perfect culmination to what they had been building toward and working toward all season 9, which is one of my favorite seasons as well. And that's why it's my number one episode, because it felt like a satisfactory payoff to everything. Not only the season has been setting up, but frankly, the whole series had been setting up. He had found balance between his Kryptonian self and his, human self. And the team of heroes is here. Perry White's represented through, like, talking to Lois and offering her a job. Like, all the pieces are here. So even though characters and actors aren't here, everybody's represented in a certain way. Jimmy Olsen, Lex Luthor, Martha Kent, Perry White. I mean, how much work can you get there? And of course, Clark and Lois are in this as well. So I don't know, like, I've never been more satisfied with an episode of Smallville back when I first saw it or rewatching it here for the podcast than this one. And that's why it's my number one.
Your number one. I knew it was going to be on your list. And then I lost track of it. And then, of course, it could only be number one. I rewatched this last night because I knew it was going to be on your list. And I said, let me give it a fair shake, or at least be able to talk about it more specifically with you. And it is especially strong. I mean, I would say ranking finales could have been its own episode, but I feel like the first 4 finales, Tempest, Exodus, Covenant, Commencement, very strong in my opinion. After that point, I wasn't so hot on Vessel.
No, Vessel might be on my honorary mentions.
Oh, okay. All right. Again, I don't hate it, but it's not one of my favorites. Phantom was solid, but the stakes didn't feel quite right.
It's a fun episode. It's an exciting episode, but it doesn't. Yeah, I hear you there. Yeah.
Arctic, that had some issues. Doomsday we've talked about, and then that's our. And then Salvation is our last season finale. And so I would say for the back half of the series, it's, to me, I'd say the strongest season finale, and it is a great payoff to that season. I think overall, I think you're just a lot hotter on season 9, the whole Zod arc. I don't dislike it. It's strong to me, but it wasn't, as I'm sitting here wearing my Blur shirt.
You're the one wearing Blur shirt.
But no, everything, it just didn't resonate with me quite that much, but I don't disagree with anything you said. And I, for years on this podcast, I've been calling out that rain-soaked blue kryptonite fight between Zod and Clark. It's so badass. It's great. When Clark takes off the
you love the
jacket,
humans so much to see if you can fight like one, eh?
yeah, I mean, when Clark takes off that trench coat and wraps it around, they're going at it. I mean, it's great, and plunging the dagger into himself. And yeah, just throughout, the fact that he's initially so gung-ho about finding another way to save Zod, stop this army, but then ultimately realizing that his path is to make the sacrifice to leave Earth to go with them. It does make me laugh though when he's talking to the other heroes, and he's like, "I once thought my destiny was was here on Earth, like 5 minutes ago."
Yeah,
he talks about it like it was this long ago thing, but no, it's a great payoff, and that finale fight really went a long way towards redeeming what we had gotten the previous season with Doomsday. So I think they learned from their mistakes. It's funny. I was thinking about this. It's kind of shocking. Maybe not shocking, because I know their budget would have been limited in terms of what they could have possibly shown of New Krypton. But there's a part of me that's like, you could have envisioned a season 10 that started off with Clark somewhere else. Like, the journey home starts now. It's like, how does Clark get back? Right.
Think about that.
And I think about, they could have realized, I mean, I'm sure it would have been, New Krypton would have been either the woods or desert, like just, it's always, I always go back to Supernatural. They go to heaven, it's the woods, but heavily saturated. They go to purgatory, it's the woods, but desaturated. They go to hell, it's the dungeon. It's like, they could have figured something out, but no, it was a very strong finale. I hear you on that. Well, here's my question for you. I know you said you enjoyed it a lot the first time around, but do you think that your opinion of it has increased, has improved because of the eventual series finale we got? Like, do you look at this and you're like, "Whoa, this would have been a far more satisfying series finale"?
I look at a lot of episodes, Anthony, and think those would have been better series finale. But no, I think I even appreciate it more now because studying season 9, going through episode by episode, this is how you set up and pay off, man. Way to go, And it kind of gave me all the things I was looking for, and he's Superman now, right? As far as I'm concerned, and I know my destiny. He says it, and there it is. And that's what a way to end it, man. I know of season 9, I should say. I know.
If only he didn't become so prideful just one episode later and have to get shot down by Jor-El.
Pride
takes that costume right away from him.
But you see my point, though. Like, all the elements are there. Like, he's like, you got a picture of Lex. He's our president. Lois is there. They say Jimmy Olsen, Perry White's on the phone with Lois, and Martha made him the costume. Like, they found a way, even though they did the Justice League. Why aren't they fighting? Oh, because Zod spread his people all around the earth, and they account for everything that I could say. Hey, actually. So I appreciate it on such on every level, man. And then again, like, a really satisfying payoff to the romance between Lois and Clark, which again, we haven't been talking about much. This is not top 10 list, but I mean, they didn't, up until season 8, they weren't doing much with Lois and Clark other than like Red Kryptonite stuff and we don't like each other. Isn't it funny? And so I was not picking that up whatever they were putting down. So that's why a lot of it's not here on my list.
Well, and it's funny because we're recording this just as the relationships episode that we did came out, and I listened back to it, and I'm really happy with it, and I hope people have enjoyed it. But it's like, I was saying to myself, I'm like, oh, like, did we talk about Lois enough? But then I say to myself, Clark and Lana dominated 7 seasons out of 10. It's like, I think we kind of allocated space in the conversation based on the representation in the series. So I think that kind of accounts for what we're seeing here too. I mean, Lois and Clark were fantastic, and I love the place that they got to, but it's really only, I mean, you get a good bit in the first half of season 8, and then we know where that goes. And then it's mostly the last couple of seasons out of 10 years. So there's only so much. But all right, your number 1 is Salvation from season 9. Well, I love it.
And that's why, like, I had to restructure a little bit about this. I'm like, okay, I can't, because I was like, I can't have Salvation and then Homecoming because Lex and Lionel, like, they're so important to the show. And do these rankings really matter? No. But to me, I felt like I had to represent, like, quote unquote, what my Smallville was a little higher. Right. Yeah. And those early seasons to us who were there from day one, that's just so important to us. So I have no idea what you're not. I have some guesses. I'm very excited to hear what your number 1 is. So please.
I think this is actually a pretty dark horse choice. And it's one of the ones I have been talking about this for years here and there on the podcast. And when I was making the list, there was a part of me that's like, do you go with a more expected choice? And I was like, no. You need to listen to the truth of your heart. You have long felt that there is one episode that is the best episode of the show, and you stick to your guns and you put it out there. And that is, for me, season 5, episode 3, Hidden.
Oh, yes.
That is my number 1.
I support this pick.
And the reason why, I guess not unlike what I was saying about Reckoning, this one to me runs the gamut of emotion, where you open the episode with a powerless Clark waking up in bed with Lana. They've fallen asleep inadvertently at the Kent farm, and they're sneaking out of bed and trying to sneak Lana out. And of course, they run into the Kents. And it's a very comical, humorous, lighthearted scene, right? So we start off on that note. And then as the episode progresses, there's this former Smallville High student who has, I mean, I know it's a pretty outlandish scenario, but access to this nuclear silo. And he's going to nuke Smallville, right? Because it's this blight on the planet with all of its meteor infected. And he takes Chloe and all of that. And Clark intervenes, powerless Clark, but he still tries to save the day. And he gets shot and dies. And that's when Lionel, who's been in a padded cell in a reversal of what we saw at the end of Shattered with Lex, activated by Jor-El, inhabited by Jor-El, takes Clark's body, brings him to the fortress, restores his life and his powers, and sends Clark into action to stop this nuclear missile. We get, again, go back to an era of the show where they had budget. I mean, we get Clark making a super leap into the air, stopping that missile, showing up back on the farm to greet a distraught Lana who thinks Clark is dead. She sees him. Dishwalla's song Collide comes on. She jumps into his arms. His clothes are torn. He's covered in dirt. He's miraculously alive. Who can explain it? Who cares? They have this embrace.
Yeah, they don't care to explain it to her.
And then you have this such a bittersweet final scene between Clark and Chloe, where he reveals that, yes, he's back. He's been restored. His powers are returned. But as Jor-El in the form of Lionel explains, there has to be a balance, and someone close to him will pay the price in the near future. And he's like, I think I've made a terrible mistake. And so like over the course of that one episode, you have the comedy, the joy, the spectacle, the tragedy of Clark's death, the event of his return, and then this bittersweet summation at the end with Chloe. I've always held this up because I feel like it just captures everything that's so great about the show. So that is my number one, Hidden, from season 5.
No, that's a great way to look at it. It's kind of the show in a nutshell, right? I mean, his whole journey, and then to accepting being a hero, even being forced into it, and then saving the day. And that's this is an honorable mention for me, by the way, because when you mention like, well, you know, if it's just episodes with moments, and that's the first one that came to mind, because like that save, the nuclear missile save, is like best save of the show, maybe. I don't know, like that, or saving that kid from the meteor and commencement, or I'm a dog lover, so saving Shelby from the truck blowed up. Anyway, lots of great saves. But to see him do that, something we'd never seen before. You know, I was on Talkville for this episode, Anthony, and I mentioned how important this was. This was. I remember watching this back in the day in college, and we were watching Lance and I, again, shout out to Lance, but we were like, whatever, like, I remember when Lionel like stood up and like, oh, like we were just like visually getting excited. He smashes the glass and super speeds. It's like, what is this? Anything's possible now on this show. And then of course, when he like Clark jumps up and saves the day with a nuclear missile, that was incredible stuff. And beyond all that, the emotional stuff. I mean, because I was back on board with the Clark and Lana by this time because they were having a happy relationship. Like it's sweet and cute and innocent. And it kind of took me back to those early days when they were just a couple of crazy kids, without responsibility. But I guess that's kind of the message too. Like you can't stay in that place forever and you got to grow up. And so like, I don't know, like, and yes, it is a little outlandish, but the show was outlandish. So you got to go with it. And I thought like, I don't know, like when he gets shot and Chloe's reaction to that, and he's just bleeding out on the street, and Martha and Jonathan's reaction to her son dying, like, and then Lana talking to him as he's dying, like, I don't know. It's a great episode, man. I'm really pleased it's on the top. Number one. I was like, what is he going to pick, the pilot? Like, I kind of thought you might, because I know you're like either on or off mic. You're like, I watched the pilot and it's really good. He's going to pull Rosenbaum and say nothing's better than the pilot.
No, I'll pull back the curtain. I messaged Zach ahead of time. I was like, should we just kind of categorize the pilot as its own thing? And you, to your credit, you're like, no, if you want to have it on the list, like it has to take up a spot. And ultimately, clearly it didn't earn a spot on my top 10. I do think it is genuinely one of the great television pilots ever, especially of its era. And it so sets up all of these dynamics that will continue to be paid off for seasons to come. So I think it's an exceptional pilot. But I do, in my mind, and this is cheating, but I still kind of look at it as its own category. It sets up the show, but then we have all of the episodes that we're talking about. But yeah, man, Hidden is my number one.
I think I take the pilot for granted. Maybe, I'm like, oh well, sure, of course he was going to do that. He was my father. Like I'm Clark in that mindset. Of course it's good. It's the pilot, and I'm like, but I had to. None of us would be here without the pilot. But I think the pilot just sets you up for other greatness, as we talked about, because. For our list, very similar, but like the first couple in this last one here, there's some variation. So I'm glad we had some variation. I guess less than we thought when we started this list, but I'm glad we had some variation, Anthony.
I am too. It allowed us. Well, here's the good thing: we had enough variation that I think it allowed us to cover a few more episodes, but we had enough overlap where we kept this under 3 hours. So
look at that.
Now. Honorable mentions. I'll also peel back the curtain. You messaged me. You were like, should we do honorable mentions? I was like, yeah, maybe like up to 5. And you were like, I was thinking 15. I was like, 15. So we landed on 10. But we're not gonna really talk about them. We're just gonna list them. All right.
But before we do that, real quick, I think it is interesting to note. Should we read our 10 off again? Just for
the
record's
you're right.
sake?
You're right. Okay. Do you want to read yours and I'll read mine?
Yeah. So number 10. Season 4, episode 17, Onyx. Number 9, season 3, episode 2, Phoenix. Season 8. Oh,
6.
You don't
have to do the seasons.
I'm not
episodes.
doing the season. So that's what am I doing? Okay, so from the top, my top 10 episodes of Smallville from 10 to 1. Number 10, Onyx. Number 9, Phoenix. Number 8, Justice. Number 7, Reckoning. Number 6, Tempest. Number 5, Shattered. Number 4, Homecoming. Number 3, Rosetta. Number 2, Memoria. And number 1, Salvation.
Right on. And my list, number 10, Insurgents. Number 9, Run. Number 8, Tempest. Number 7, Rosetta. Number 6, Shattered. Number 5, Transference. Number 4, Memoria. Number 3, Reckoning. Number 2, Homecoming. And number 1, Hidden.
Interesting to note, no season 7 or 8 representation from either of us.
Yes.
Between the two of us, we got all the other seasons.
I know,
but I'm representing season 9 big time over here, making sure it's represented. But a lot of season 3 for both of us, and I'm honestly the most surprised and happy I am, and I'm glad Hidden's on there because that's great. Tempest being on your list was the greatest surprise to me because I thought I was the only one who was going to have that in a top 10 list. So I'm very happy.
It was one of those. It wasn't. I don't know that it was in my first pass, but then I was like, no, like I wanted season 1. And to be honest, it was, initially I was like Pilot or Tempest. Like I kind of figured it was going to be one of them, but I was like, no, man, like, and especially when I think about what's fun to rewatch, like what I would be more keen to pop on and watch it. It's that. Now for honorable mentions, did you rank them or no?
No.
Okay.
I did not. That was too much work.
That's fine. Well, I sort of did, but I didn't really put that much thought into it. Let me just ask you this. What were the 1 or 2 that were like the hardest, like the first cuts?
Transference. And I would say definitely Transference or Run. Because I've been my season 4 slot, which I allotted 1 to, had to go to Onyx. But that's what I've always said this too. I was critical of season 4. Some of the best episodes individually, the whole series are in there.
Yeah.
So those were the toughest ones for me, honestly.
The toughest cut by far, by far, was Lexmas.
Like, see, a lot of people, I appreciate Lexmas, but I know a lot of people who Lexmas is in their top 10 and people love it. It's one of their favorite. And I do appreciate it, but it's not even in my honorable mentions right now, but I get it. I understand. I think, so it's weird because the Santa Claus subplot, I liked, but I think that's ultimately why it didn't earn a spot. I think if the whole thing had been Lex's vision, I think it would have been on the list. There was something about it where I'm just like, you got to find those little things. See, you got to find those little reasons to take this stuff off. But it's so charming though. Yeah, no, I know. Santa is canon. I know. But that one and Descent was also a hard cut. I thought about Descent. They're not on. Those are not on my honorable mentions either. But Descent and even Fracture, just because to me personally, like I had such a strong emotional reaction to Fracture watching it for the first time, even again now. But those are the ones I'm like, well, important to me, but not necessarily, top material.
So real quick, so my honorable mentions were Lexmas, Descent, Asylum, Nemesis, where they're trapped in the mines, Justice, Red, First Red Kryptonite. And then I did have a couple of season 8 ones, Odyssey, the season 8 premiere, Legion. So season 8 was represented in my honorable mentions. Onyx was an honorable mention. And again, another standout Tom Welling performance, Splinter, when he's infected with the silver kryptonite. Those were my honorable mentions. What were yours?
My honorable mentions are in chronological order of when the episodes came out, because that's the way I was doing it here for my listing. Heat, Run, Transference, Hidden, Aqua, Vessel, Absolute Justice, Warrior, Kent, and Booster.
Oh, right on.
Warrior might be surprising to some people. I find that a delightful, charming episode of Smallville. It is like it epitomizes, like they talk about whimsy and all that stuff, and it was like injecting some of that back into season 9 is a dark season, and that kind of brings some joy back into it. So that's why I would probably say if people heard that, they would probably be most surprised by Warrior. So that's why I just wanted to elaborate slightly on it. So those are my honorable mentions, Anthony.
I mean, I guess we have to acknowledge neither one of us put the series finale on our list or our honorable mention.
No, of course not.
This is the only one I'll elaborate on because I don't know this. I think it warrants a minute, but which is, we talked about the moments that I love about the series finale, the final guidance from the Kents in the barn, the final Clark Lex scene, the trials, the scene in the fortress with Jor-El and Jonathan, the shirt rip, Lois and Clark, their vows, their walk down the aisle. Those are the moments of the series finale I love. They're some of my favorite moments of the series, but if we're talking start to finish, Lex's mind wipe and the CGI costume mar that finale, and I cannot overlook that. And does it ruin the episode for me? No, I won't go that far. I've ultimately made my peace with it, but it is enough where I could not include it here or in the honorable mentions.
No, we made our peace with it together. I mean, I feel I'm glad that we talked about that before I'm going into season 10. We'll see how I react to it when we get there in the podcast proper. I'm always on the Smallville, but a lot of people, Anthony, they love the series finale, and I'm happy for them. I am. I wish I was you, but
do you get the sense there are people who came to the show later or people who watched live or both?
Probably. If I had to guess, I would say people that came later.
Because I understand that more. Like if I went into this show, like if I had binged it over a shorter amount of time and or I knew going in like, oh, Tom Welling never actually wears a costume, but we'll see him in CGI form. I don't know. I probably would have been okay. I mean, I've talked about this before. The first time you came on the podcast and we did our wish list, I talked about like that disassociation I felt as I was watching that finale where I'm like, oh, he's becoming Superman, but we're not seeing it. Like it's these far away shots. He's tiny. He's CGI. Like there was this weird sense it was not computing as I was watching it. And it really took a long time to get over that. But
I feel people watching in like quick succession. It's like, oh, okay. Well, that was it. He became Superman. Great. I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like,
yeah,
I was waiting 10 years for this. So you're going to have a different, I feel like that might be a big factor into people's satisfaction, if you will, of the finale. So, but as we all know, the real finale moment was when he became Superman, when he floated in the barn and saw his trials. Like that was very therapeutic for me. So I'm glad we have that talk.
Yeah, that's it. He becomes Superman, and that's
it. And then we're out.
One thing that I purposely have really not talked about it. Lance and I touched on it briefly when we talked about Lex, but that Crisis cameo, right? And even when you and I charted Clark's journey, we stopped.
I was not going to bring it up. I didn't want to be the guy. So yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to say real quick for people who've been following the show, I did an episode years ago called "How the Arrowverse Failed the Clark Kent of Smallville." My initial read on the Crisis scene. When Tom Welling and Erica Durance returned for the Arrowverse crossover a few years ago, I was really put off by it. The notion that Clark had given up his powers and was living this domestic life on the farm with Lois and their unseen daughters. It didn't sit right with me because I felt like it didn't reflect where Clark had gotten by the end of the show. I feel like that spoke to an earlier iteration of Clark who only longed to be normal and to be human. But I felt like by the series finale, and hell, even rewatching the show, by that Metropolis era, he had embraced his role as protector and he had started at least to reconcile those two sides of himself. And he completed that by the end of the show. And so I didn't feel like what we got in Crisis was was kind of an appropriate end for the character. It also really put me off that Lois jokes with Clark about this warning that he's been issued about the crisis. It's like, given everything they've been through, that really felt kind of off note to me.
Mm-hmm.
However, what allowed me to make peace with it is that in comic book lore, whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow, which is essentially the ending that they give Clark here, is my favorite version. I mean, in the realm of possibility where he lives a normal human life, or he outlives everyone, or Lois's DNA is preserved and she's recreated in the far future, or she takes a potion that allows her to keep living. Like, we've seen all different permutations.
Right.
I think the one that feels right to me for my favorite character is God becomes man and he just lives. And so the idea that my favorite version of the character, Tom Wellings, gets my favorite version of the ending, there's something that's really appealing about that. I just think that it was jarring to go from where we left Clark to what we saw in Crisis. I think there's a story that could be told in live action and animation. Something
in Smallville, the animated series.
Yeah. But I think there's a story that could be told where you actually get to see, no, he really completed his superhero journey. Not unlike the comic book, whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow. Like, he's at the end of his journey there, and there's a specific reason why he gives up his powers. So I think there's a story that would make me feel even more comfortable with it. But overall, I've made my peace with it. How about you?
No, I loved it from when I saw it. I felt it was extremely appropriate. Of course, before it came out, I was on record saying, if he's not in a Superman costume, then what's the point? How dare he come back and not do it again? And so disappointing. But no, seeing what they did, it felt like Smallville, you know? If I saw the two of them working the Daily Planet, I'd be like, this doesn't feel like Smallville. Like, it wasn't about necessarily like, we're going to find them back. See, here's the key. Here's the key. And I'm sure I've thought this, but now I'm articulating it now. You know, we've said a few times now, it was frustrating to us why they somehow decided the end of Smallville needed to be this comic book status quo for Superman. What are you doing? Like, this is a unique thing. Well, guess what? The Crisis is not that. It is the Smallville ending. It is like the very appropriate for that. And let's not forget, I know it's frustrating we didn't see him in the costume. I'm not disputing that whatsoever. But it's been 8 or 9 years since he became Superman, right? And that's a pretty long career for these superheroes, especially if we're going to do live action versions and whatnot. He has an ending. There is an appeal to having characters that have no end. They go off and their adventures go on forever. And that's what the comic book's for, you know? But if you want this version to have an ending, this is a great ending. You know, he lives happily ever after on the farm after putting in his time, much like Captain America in the MCU. The guy, he woke up 75 years later, he put in his time for a decade, and then he got to go back, spoilers for Avengers Endgame, which is, everyone's seen it because it's the most successful movie of all time. He gets to go back in time and live happily ever after with the love of his life, right? So he earned that. And he's not going to be in Captain America. No one's complaining about that. This Clark Kent he's not, doesn't need to go be Superman forever. He was in my favorite episode of Smallville. He was going to leave the planet in the hands of the Justice League. And you know what? He did the same thing here, and I'm fine with it.
Right on. And in my headcanon, he made peace with Lex, because that's the other thing. It's like, how could he abdicate his role while Lex is president? But in my headcanon, Lex was redeemed and they made peace. And I'm going to hold on to that.
My headcanon is that's just a cute line about like, I love the president, huh? But that's its own thing. And people get so upset. I mean, trust me, no one obsesses more about Smallville and continuity than me. So the kid for season 3 touched him. He saw the future with the cape, man. I'm like, you know what else that episode said? That episode said destiny changes like all the time. So it's not set in stone. So I'm glad this Clark is not going to die alone, sad with gravestones around him and all that. So I'm glad he's going to live happily. He has a wife and children. He's living on his farm. He's living his dream. And if the need presented itself, he could go find a crystal somewhere to get his powers back and do what he needed to do. And all jokes aside about Smallville, the animated series, I'm totally here for it. If it's before, after, during, or even if it ignores all that. We're here from our adventures in Smallville. 218 episodes is not enough, Anthony.
I do count Absolute Justice as 2 episodes. It was 2 episodes that happened to air together. They were 2 episodes. That's
why I always say it that way. I'm very careful. If people have paid attention, I always say it that way. Anyway, Absolute Justice, man. That was an honorable mention to me. But anyway,
yeah,
good stuff. This is fantastic. This was again a different gear of talking about Smallville than usual. I mean, because we talked about all these character journeys and stuff, and of course I talk about episode by episode. But here, just top 10 list, fantastic stuff. it's always fun to geek out with you about Superman, especially Smallville. So thanks for having me on this big event.
No, likewise, man. This whole run of episodes, including this one, has been just an absolute joy. I really can't express how much fun this has been. Smallville, I said this at the beginning, I'll say it now, my favorite interpretation of the legend, more so now than ever. Tom Welling, Michael Rosenbaum, Erica Durance, like those are my definitive versions of the characters. That's who I think of first and foremost. They're first in my heart. I love the other incarnations that we've gotten. It's funny, when we were talking about the Superboy TV show, one thing that came up, and I know a lot of the Superboy fans we know, friends of ours, are always quick to point out, like, oh, Superboy had Lex and Superboy switch bodies before Smallville did, or Superboy had Lex and Superboy trapped in the mines before Smallville did, and we don't have to put anything else down to lift something else up. But all I would say is, in my mind, it's credit where credit's due when something comes first, right, and breaks that ground. But to me, it's not who did it first, it's who did it best. And to me, it's Smallville. It's Smallville, and I will stand by that. And again, it's been cool doing these episodes, hearing from so many fellow fans. It's been great to bring in this full circle, have these conversations that I just didn't really have the opportunity to all those years ago. So I thank you so much. And well, I look forward to talking to you again in a few episodes for Superman 3.
That's right. The Smallville Superman movie, if there ever was one. So I'm looking forward to that one. But until then, Anthony, see you in the funny pages.
Yes. Thank you, Zach. Make sure you check out all of Zach's podcasts that we talked about at the beginning of the show. Audience, not only does this conclude the Trials of Smallville, it concludes a Superboy fan journey, our sprawling, months-long coverage of Clark as the Boy of Steel. It's been a fascinating journey of exploration for me. Thank you all for coming along for this ride. Next week is our milestone 175th episode as a Superman fan journey resumes. Don't miss it. Until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. Be sure to check out our sister podcast series, Another Exciting Episode in the Adventures of Superman, an episode-by-episode breakdown of the classic George Reeves television show, available wherever you get podcasts. Please join us on social media, become a patron, and subscribe, rate, and review today. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all.